I interrogated an alien inside Area 51. He claimed the Bible was written by his kind, true story. Before I start, do me a favor. Comment where you're listening from. Your bedroom, your car, sitting at work with headphones in. Doesn't matter. Just tell me. Because if this recording disappears tomorrow, if I disappear tomorrow, at least I'll know that somebody, somewhere, heard what I'm about to tell you. And trust me, they don't want you to hear this. I'm recording this on a burner laptop, in a location I'm not going to name, using about 7 different encryption methods that I learned from people who don't technically exist. Every time a car drives by outside, my heart stops. Every notification on my phone makes me think they've found me. But I have to do this. I have to tell someone before they erase me like they've erased everyone else who tried to talk. My name is Marcus Holloway, Staff Sergeant, United States Army. 12 years of service. If you look me up, you'll find my basic service record. Nothing special, nothing classified, just another grunt who did his time in Iraq and came home. That's what they want you to see. What you won't find is what I've been doing for the last 6 years. You won't find any record of where I was stationed from March 2018 until 3 weeks ago when I ran. You won't find the non-disclosure agreements I signed, the psychological evaluations I underwent every 30 days, or the threats they made against my family if I ever opened my mouth. But I'm opening it now, because what I saw, what I learned, it's bigger than my life. It's bigger than all of our lives. I need you to understand something before I go any further. I'm not crazy. I'm not looking for attention. I'm not trying to sell you a book or get podcast interviews. In fact, I'm doing the exact opposite. I'm guaranteeing that I'll never have a normal life again. The moment I hit upload on this, I become a target. They'll call me a conspiracy theorist, a disgruntled veteran with PTSD, maybe even a traitor. They'll discredit everything about me. They're good at that. I've watched them do it to others, but I don't care anymore, because staying silent makes me complicit in the biggest lie ever told to humanity. What I'm about to tell you will destroy everything you believe in. I'm not exaggerating. If you grew up religious, if you have faith in any God, if you believe in the sanctity of human spirituality, this is going to shatter that. I know because it shattered mine. I grew up in a Baptist household in East Texas. My father was a pastor. I read the Bible cover to cover by the time I was 14. I believed, truly believed, that there was a divine plan, that we were special, that we mattered to something greater than ourselves. I joined the military partially because I thought I was serving God and country. That faith got me through my first deployment, through watching friends die, through things that would have broken me otherwise. That faith is gone now, not because I chose to abandon it, but because I learned the truth. And the truth is so much worse than anything you've imagined in your darkest moments. I'm talking about something that makes every conspiracy theory you've ever heard look quaint. Flat Earth? Child's play? Moon landing hoax? Please? Illuminati controlling the world? That's kindergarten stuff compared to what's really happening. What I'm about to share with you involves something that humanity has speculated about for decades, but never confirmed, until now. Before I get into the specifics, you need to know how I ended up in this situation. I wasn't recruited because I was special. I wasn't chosen because I had unique skills or clearances. I was selected for one specific reason that I didn't understand until much later: my religious background. They needed someone who understood theology, who grew up immersed in biblical teachings, who could have, let's call it a productive conversation about faith. They needed an interrogator, sure, but not the kind who breaks fingers and waterboards suspects. They needed someone who could talk about Genesis and Revelation, about angels and demons, about the nature of God himself. I didn't know any of this when I got my transfer orders in March 2018. Just a classified memo telling me to report to a location in Nevada with coordinates that weren't on any official map. No explanation, no briefing. Just, report here, bring nothing personal, tell no one. When you've been in military intelligence as long as I have, you learn not to ask questions. You just follow orders. But I'll admit, when I saw those coordinates and realized where they pointed, my hands shook a little. Because every soldier, every intelligence operative, every person with clearance knows about that place. We all know the rumors. We all know the legends. But most of us think it's exactly that. Legends. I was wrong. Area 51 is real. And what they keep there is so far beyond experimental aircraft or Russian spy technology that it's almost laughable we ever thought that's what they were hiding. What I saw in the 7 floors beneath the Nevada desert made me question reality itself. Made me question whether we're actually the dominant species on this planet, or whether we're just livestock, pets, an experiment that got out of hand. And the thing I interrogated for 6 months, the entity that spoke to me in ways that bypassed language entirely and went straight into my skull, that thing told me truths that I can never unhear. It told me that the Bible wasn't written by God. It told me that every major religious text in human history was authored by them, by his kind, as a form of control, as a way to keep us docile, obedient, and most importantly, ignorant of what we really are and what they've been doing to us for thousands of years. And then, it showed me proof. Proof that I verified through classified documents I wasn't supposed to see. Proof that lines up with archaeological discoveries that governments have been suppressing for decades. Proof that made me realize my entire life, my entire belief system, was built on a foundation of lies. So yeah, comment where you're from. Tell me you're hearing this, because everything you think you know is about to change. And it all started with a transfer order I didn't ask for, to a place that isn't supposed to exist, to interrogate something that isn't supposed to be real. But it is real. God help me. It's all real. Let me back up and tell you who I was before all this happened, before my world got turned inside out. I grew up in Marshall, Texas, small town, population barely 15,000. The kind of place where Friday night football is religion, and actual religion is, well, also religion. My dad, Robert Holloway, was the pastor at First Baptist Church on Houston Street. Every Sunday morning, Sunday night, and Wednesday evening, our family was in those pews. My mom played piano, my older sister sang in the choir, and me, I was the pastor's kid who had to be perfect, had to set an example, had to know every Bible verse by heart because everyone was watching. I resented it as a teenager, but looking back now, that upbringing shaped everything. It gave me a moral foundation, sure, but it also gave me something else. An intimate knowledge of Scripture that would later make me the perfect candidate for the worst assignment of my life. I joined the Army right out of high school in 2006, partly because I wanted to serve my country, partly because I wanted to get the hell out of Marshall, and partly because my dad always preached about duty and sacrifice. Infantry at first, 11 Bravo, grunt work. Deployed to Iraq in 2009, spent 18 months in Tikrit doing convoy security and house-to-house searches. Saw combat, lost friends, did things I still have nightmares about. But I was good at keeping my head down and following orders. Maybe too good. Someone noticed that I didn't break under pressure, that I could compartmentalize, that I had this weird ability to stay calm when everything was exploding around me. When I got back stateside in 2011, I got pulled into military intelligence. They put me through interrogation training at Fort Huachuca. Not the Hollywood torture stuff, but the psychological approach. How to read people, how to build rapport, how to extract information without them even realizing they're giving it to you. For the next 7 years, I did domestic intelligence work, mostly counterintelligence, catching spies, investigating security breaches, interrogating suspects who tried to sell classified information to foreign governments. It was boring most of the time, bureaucratic, lots of paperwork, but I was good at it. I made staff sergeant, got commendations, built a reputation as someone who could get people to talk. I wasn't the guy who scared prisoners. I was the guy who made them think I was their friend, their only ally in a system designed to crush them. And they'd tell me everything. I thought that's what I'd be doing for the rest of my career. Comfortable, safe, predictable. I was wrong. March 12th, 2018. That's the day everything changed. I was at my desk at Fort Meade in Maryland, going through reports about a Navy contractor who might have been leaking submarine specifications to China, when my commanding officer walked in with a manila envelope. He didn't say anything, just dropped it on my desk, looked at me with this expression I couldn't read, somewhere between pity and envy, and walked out. The envelope had a red diagonal stripe across it. Eyes only. Top secret SCI. When I opened it, there was a single page inside. Transfer orders. Effective immediately. Report to coordinates 37.2350 Grien, 115.81, 1 countdown low. No unit designation. No explanation. No timeline for return. Just bring minimal personal effects. No electronic devices. No communication with family until arrival. I pulled up those coordinates on my computer. Middle of nowhere, Nevada. Groom Lake area. My stomach dropped. Everyone in the intelligence community knows what's at Groom Lake, even if we're not supposed to talk about it. Area 51, Dreamland, Paradise Ranch, whatever you want to call it. The most classified military installation in the United States, maybe the world. The place where they supposedly tested the U-2, the SR-71, stealth technology. The place where, according to every conspiracy theorist on the planet, the government keeps alien spacecraft and bodies. I'd always dismissed that stuff as nonsense, disinformation to hide real classified aircraft projects. But now I was being sent there, with no explanation, no warning, and orders that basically said, disappear and don't ask questions. I had 48 hours to report. I couldn't tell my parents where I was going, just that I had a new assignment and wouldn't be reachable for a while. My dad asked if I was going overseas again. I lied and said maybe. My mom cried. My sister asked if I was in trouble. I told them I was fine, that it was just routine military stuff, that I'd call when I could. Every word felt like ash in my mouth because I knew, somehow I just knew, that this wasn't routine. The way my CO had looked at me, the lack of information, the speed of the transfer, something was very wrong. I packed a duffel bag with clothes, toiletries, and nothing else. Left my phone at home like the orders specified. Drove to Andrews Air Force Base where an unmarked plane was waiting. No insignia, no identification numbers, just flat gray paint and a pilot who didn't make eye contact. The flight took about 4 hours. I was the only passenger. No windows in the cargo area where I sat, just red emergency lighting and the constant drone of engines. When we landed, I felt the heat the moment they opened the door, that dry Nevada desert heat that hits you like a physical force. It was dusk, the sky turning purple and orange, and I could see mountains in the distance. A black SUV was waiting on the tarmac, engine running. 2 men in civilian clothes, tactical pants, polo shirts, sunglasses even though the sun was setting, gestured for me to get in. No introductions, no small talk. We drove for maybe 20 minutes down a perfectly straight road through absolutely nothing, just scrub brush and sand and heat shimmer rising off the asphalt. Then I saw it, the base, except it didn't look like any base I'd ever seen. No visible buildings from the perimeter, just a massive fence topped with razor wire and signs every 50 feet. No trespassing, use of deadly force authorized, security checkpoints every quarter mile, each one more intense than the last. Retinal scanners, fingerprint analysis, guards with M4s who looked at me like I was already guilty of something. The SUV took us past what looked like aircraft hangars, massive structures that could hold anything, and then to a nondescript concrete building that could have been an office complex anywhere in America, except for the armed guards at every entrance and the complete absence of windows. Inside, the temperature dropped 30 degrees, industrial air conditioning humming through vents, fluorescent lights that made everything look slightly unreal, slightly too bright. A colonel was waiting in what looked like a standard military office. Desk, filing cabinets, American flag in the corner, except there was something off about it. The furniture was too new. The walls were too clean. It felt like a stage set of an office rather than a real one. He introduced himself as Colonel Vance, shook my hand with a grip that was just a little too firm, and told me to sit down. Then he slid another non-disclosure agreement across the desk. I'd signed dozens of NDAs in my career, but this one was different. This one had paragraphs about existential security matters and information beyond standard classification protocols and consequences that included indefinite detention and permanent separation from civilian society. I signed it. What choice did I have? And that's when Colonel Vance finally told me why I was there. Staff Sergeant Holloway, he said, you're here because you have a very specific skill set we need. You're an experienced interrogator. You have top-level clearance, and most importantly, you have extensive knowledge of religious texts and theology. We need someone who can have certain conversations that require that background. I asked him what kind of conversations. He stood up, walked to the door, and looked back at me with an expression I'll never forget. Not quite a smile, not quite a warning, just acknowledgement of something terrible. The kind of conversations, he said, that will make you question everything you think you know about reality. Welcome to Groom Lake, Sergeant. I hope you're ready. And that's when I realized I wasn't at Area 51 to work on aircraft or spy technology. I was here for something else entirely, something they kept in the levels below ground, in sections that didn't officially exist. And whatever it was about to change my life forever. The first thing they do when you arrive at Groom Lake isn't show you aliens or secret technology. No, the first thing they do is spend 3 days breaking down your sense of reality through paperwork and psychological conditioning. That first morning after I arrived, I was taken to what they called orientation, which sounds harmless, right? Like corporate training or a PowerPoint presentation about workplace safety. Except this orientation took place in a windowless room with a one-way mirror, and the woman conducting it was a psychologist who specialized in what she called cognitive compartmentalization. For 8 hours, she explained in clinical detail what would happen to me if I ever spoke about anything I saw or heard at this facility. Not just court-martial, not just prison. She described how people who violated security protocols at this level simply ceased to exist. Their service records scrubbed. Their families told they died in training accidents. Their bodies never found because there were no bodies, just cremation and unmarked disposal. She wasn't trying to scare me. That's what made it so much worse. She was just explaining policy, like she was describing how to file a travel voucher or request leave time. Matter of fact, professional. She showed me photographs of 3 different soldiers, all with redacted names, who had tried to leak information from Groom Lake over the past 20 years. She explained what happened to each of them in enough detail that I understood this wasn't a threat, it was a promise. One guy made it 2 days after trying to contact a journalist. They found him in his car, single gunshot wound, ruled a suicide, even though his family swore he'd never been suicidal. Another tried to smuggle out documents. He disappeared entirely. No body, no investigation, just gone. The third one tried to tell his wife. She died in a car accident 3 weeks later. He lived, but he spent the next 4 years in psychiatric detention being treated for delusional disorder. When he got out, he never spoke about it again. After the psychologist finished with me, I had to sign 17 additional documents, each one more specific than the last about what I could and couldn't discuss, who I could and couldn't contact, what would constitute a security violation. They took DNA samples, full biometric scans, and made me memorize a code word that I'd have to use in any emergency communication. Then they assigned me quarters, a small room that looked like a college dorm, maybe 10 by 12 feet, with a bed, a desk, a small bathroom, and absolutely no personal touches. No windows, obviously, no TV, no internet access, just a landline phone that only connected to internal base extensions and a bookshelf with pre-approved reading material, technical manuals mostly. I noticed a Bible on the shelf and almost laughed at the irony. Would I still want to read it after whatever I was about to learn? I didn't know yet. I should have left it on the shelf. The first 2 weeks at Groom Lake were almost disappointingly normal. They assigned me to interrogation duty in what they called Sector 2, which I later learned was code for the boring stuff. My job was exactly what I'd been doing at Fort Meade, interviewing suspects who'd been caught trying to compromise national security. Chinese nationals caught photographing military installations, Russian operatives posing as academics, a contractor from Lockheed Martin who tried to sell radar specifications to Iranian intermediaries. Standard stuff, tedious actually. I'd sit in a plain interrogation room with concrete walls and cheap furniture, build rapport, extract information, write reports. The only difference was the security protocol. Every session was recorded on 6 different cameras. Every word I spoke was transcribed and reviewed by analysts I never met. And every suspect was transferred out within 48 hours of my interrogation, taken somewhere else, somewhere I wasn't cleared to know about. But it was the atmosphere that got to me. The constant surveillance, sure, but more than that, the silence. Nobody at Groom Lake talked to each other. Not really. You'd pass people in hallways and they'd nod, but never make eye contact. In the cafeteria, people ate alone, or in groups that clearly had pre-existing clearances to communicate. I tried making small talk with another interrogator during lunch my 2nd week there. Asked him how long he'd been stationed here. He looked at me like I'd just asked him to commit treason, mumbled 6 months, and literally got up and moved to another table. I learned fast. Don't ask questions. Don't volunteer information. Don't be curious. Just do your job. File your reports. Go back to your room and count the days until your rotation ends. Except nobody could tell me when my rotation would end. When I asked my supervisor, he just said, "When your assignment is complete." When I asked what my assignment was, he said, "You'll know when it's time." The cameras were everywhere. And I mean everywhere. In the hallways, in the interrogation rooms, in the cafeteria, probably in the bathrooms, though I tried not to think about that. Little black domes in the ceiling, recording everything all the time. After a while, you almost stopped noticing them. Almost. But then you'd catch yourself about to say something, even something innocent, and you'd remember that someone, somewhere, was watching, listening, analyzing whether you were a security risk. I started having dreams about being watched. I'd wake up in my windowless room in the middle of the night and stare at the ceiling, wondering if there were cameras there too, wondering if they monitored our sleep patterns, our nightmares, whether we talked in our sleep. The paranoia wasn't irrational. It was the only rational response to that environment. And then there were the rumors. You'd hear them in fragments, whispers in the hallway when people thought they were alone, coded references that didn't make sense until you heard them enough times to piece together a pattern. People talked about Sector 4 the way kids talk about haunted houses, with a mixture of disbelief and terror. According to the rumors, Sector 4 was 7 levels below ground, accessible only by one specific elevator that required retinal scans from 2 authorized personnel simultaneously. Some people said it was where they kept recovered aircraft from foreign nations, technology so advanced we couldn't replicate it yet. Others said it was biological research, weapons development, things that violated every international treaty. But the persistent rumor, the one that kept coming up in different variations, was that Sector 4 housed non-human biological entities. Nobody said aliens. That word was apparently forbidden. But everyone knew what non-human biological entities meant. I didn't believe it. I'm not saying I thought everyone was lying. I believed they believed it. But I figured it was just base mythology, the kind of legend that develops in any classified installation to make boring jobs seem more interesting. Like how sailors used to invent sea monsters to cope with months of monotony on the ocean. Area 51 had been the subject of alien conspiracy theories for decades, so of course the people stationed here would develop their own internal folklore. It made sense psychologically. Give people just enough real secrecy, add a dash of isolation and paranoia, and they'll fill in the blanks with whatever makes them feel like they're part of something bigger than paperwork and interrogations. I'd smile and nod when people whispered about Sector 4, but internally I was rolling my eyes. I was a trained intelligence operative. I dealt in facts, evidence, verifiable information, not campfire stories. There was this one guy, Technical Sergeant Rodriguez, who worked in the motor pool. I'd see him sometimes in the cafeteria, always sitting alone, always looking exhausted like he hadn't slept in days. One time I made the mistake of sitting near him, and he started talking without me even asking. Just talking at me, really. He said he'd been making deliveries to sub-level 5 for the past month. Special equipment, medical supplies, things he wasn't supposed to look at, but sometimes did when the manifests weren't completely sealed. He said one shipment included restraints, not handcuffs or zip ties, but custom fabricated restraint systems with specifications he'd never seen before. Designed for limbs that weren't quite the right length for humans, with joint articulation that didn't match our anatomy. He said it kept him up at night, thinking about what kind of prisoner would need restraints like that. Then he caught himself, realized he was talking too much, and practically ran out of the cafeteria. I never saw him again after that. His name disappeared from the duty roster 3 days later. Nobody mentioned him. It was like he'd never existed. That should have scared me more than it did. But I was still in denial, still convinced this was all some elaborate mind game to maintain security through manufactured mystery. I focused on my work, interviewed my suspects, filed my reports, and tried not to think about sub-levels or non-human entities or soldiers who vanished for talking too much. I told myself I'd do my 6 months or whatever this assignment was, then get transferred back to Fort Meade and normal life. I'd have a weird story to tell myself in my old age, about the time I worked at Area 51, and it turned out to be just boring counterintelligence work with extra paranoia. That's what I told myself. Right up until May 3rd, 2018. That was the day I received the message. 3 lines of text on my internal terminal when I logged in for my morning briefing. Staff SGT Holloway report to Cole Vance 0600 tomorrow. Sector 4 clearance granted. Prepare for extended assignment. I stared at that screen for 5 full minutes, my coffee getting cold in my hand, my stomach turning to ice, because I realized in that moment that everything I'd dismissed as mythology, every rumor I'd rationalized away, every warning I'd ignored, it was all about to become very, very real. I didn't sleep that night. Couldn't. Just laid in my bed staring at the ceiling, watching the red numbers on my alarm clock crawl toward 600. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that message on my terminal. Sector 4. Clearance granted. Prepare for extended assignment. What the hell did extended assignment mean? Weeks? Months? Years? And prepare how? They didn't give me instructions. Didn't tell me what to bring or what to expect. Just show up at 0600 and report to Colonel Vance. I thought about Rodriguez, about how he'd disappeared after talking about those restraints. I thought about the psychologist's orientation, about the soldiers who'd violated security and simply ceased to exist. Part of me wanted to run, just walk out of my quarters, find a vehicle, drive until I hit civilization and never look back. But I knew that was fantasy. I was in the middle of the Nevada desert on the most secure military installation in the world. There was no running. There was only forward. At 0545, I got dressed in my uniform, made sure everything was regulation perfect. I don't know why that mattered to me. Like proper sleeve rolls and shined boots would somehow protect me from whatever was waiting 7 levels below ground. But it gave me something to focus on, something normal and familiar, while my brain screamed that nothing would ever be normal again. I splashed water on my face, looked at myself in the mirror, and barely recognized the guy looking back. In just 3 weeks at Groom Lake, I'd developed shadows under my eyes, lost weight I didn't have to lose, and acquired this permanent tension in my jaw from clenching my teeth during sleep. I looked like a man preparing for war. Maybe I was. The walk to Colonel Vance's office took me through sections of the base I'd never seen before. Past Sector 2, where I'd been working, past Sector 3, which I'd glimpsed from a distance, and into a wing that required 3 separate security checkpoints, each one more intense than the last. Fingerprints, retinal scan, voice analysis, a guard who checked my blood pressure and temperature, looking for signs of intoxication or altered mental state. At the final checkpoint, they made me step through a scanner that I'd never seen before, some kind of millimeter wave technology that didn't just check for weapons, but seemed to map every molecule of my body. The guard reviewed the results, nodded, and opened a heavy steel door that looked like it belonged in a bank vault. "Colonel's expecting you," he said. "Elevators at the end of the hall. You'll need this." He handed me a key card with my photo and a clearance designation I didn't recognize. Umbra 7. The hallway was different from the rest of the base. No windows, obviously, but also no visible cameras, no fluorescent lighting, just these recessed LED strips that gave everything a blue-white glow like an operating room. The walls weren't painted concrete like the other sectors. They were some kind of smooth metallic composite that felt almost organic when I brushed against it. And it was silent, not quiet, silent, like the walls absorbed sound. My footsteps made no echo. I couldn't hear the ventilation system. Nothing. Just my own breathing and the sound of blood pumping in my ears. The elevator at the end of the hall looked normal enough. Brushed steel doors, a card reader, a keypad. But when I swiped my Umbra 7 card, the doors opened to reveal something that made my stomach drop. The elevator shaft went down. Way down. I leaned forward slightly and looked, seeing the cable disappear into darkness so deep I couldn't see the bottom. I stepped inside. The doors closed. And that's when I noticed the button panel. In most elevators, you've got floors marked 1, 2, 3, maybe a basement level marked B or LL. This panel had buttons marked with negative numbers. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 levels below ground. 7 levels that officially didn't exist in any blueprint or architectural plan of Groom Lake that I'd ever seen. I pressed 7 because that's where the message said to go. Sector 4, Level 7. The elevator didn't move at first. Just sat there for about 5 seconds while something hummed and clicked behind the walls. Some kind of additional security verification maybe, making sure I was really authorized to descend into whatever hell was waiting below. Then it started moving. Fast. Faster than any elevator I'd ever been in. My knees buckled slightly from the acceleration, and I had to grab the handrail to steady myself. The descent took almost 2 full minutes. I know because I counted every second, trying to calculate how deep we were going based on speed and duration. Rough math put us at least 400 feet below the surface, maybe more. The pressure change was noticeable. My ears popped twice, then a third time, like I was descending in an airplane. The temperature dropped too. Started around 72 degrees at ground level. Felt like maybe 65 by the time we reached 3, and by 7 it was cold enough that I could see my breath. The elevator finally slowed, my stomach lurching from the deceleration, and the doors opened with a hiss of pressurized air equalizing. I stepped out into a corridor that made the hallway above look welcoming by comparison. This was industrial, brutal. Concrete walls reinforced with steel beams, thick pipes running along the ceiling carrying God knows what, and doors. Heavy vault-style doors every 30 feet, each one marked with alphanumeric codes that meant nothing to me. Colonel Vance was waiting at the end of the corridor, standing outside a door marked S4 OPS Primary. He looked different down here, less polished, more tired, like whatever happened on level 7 aged you faster than normal duty. He nodded when he saw me, but didn't smile, didn't offer any greeting beyond, "Holloway, you're on time. Good." He turned and started walking, expecting me to follow, which I did. "I assume you didn't sleep last night," he said. It wasn't a question. "No, sir," I replied. "Good. That means you understand the gravity of what you've been read into. Most people don't sleep for a week after their first briefing down here. Some never sleep right again." He stopped in front of another door, this one marked Briefing Room 4A, and turned to face me directly. "Before we go any further, I need to confirm something. Your personnel file indicates extensive religious education, Baptist upbringing, father was a minister. You've read the Bible cover to cover multiple times. Is that accurate?" The question caught me off guard. "Yes, sir," I said. "That's accurate. But I don't understand what that has to do with—" He cut me off. "It has everything to do with why you're here, Sergeant. Your interrogation skills are solid, but they're not unique. We have dozens of trained interrogators. What you have that they don't is a deep personal understanding of Christian theology. And before you ask why that matters, let me explain something." He swiped his card and opened the briefing room door. Inside was a simple setup: a table, 2 chairs, a computer terminal, and a large monitor on the wall currently displaying a black screen. We sat down, and he pulled up a file on the terminal. "What I'm about to tell you is classified at a level beyond anything you've encountered. There are maybe 40 people in the entire United States government who know what you're about to learn. Presidents have been denied this information. Congressional oversight committees have no idea this program exists. Are we clear?" "Yes, sir," I said, even though nothing was clear, even though every instinct I had was screaming at me to leave this room and never come back. Colonel Vance typed something on the terminal, and the monitor came to life. It showed what looked like a medical file. Subject designation, NHE7, Non-Human Entity 7. Recovery date, August 1979. Location, redacted. Status, contained, conscious, cooperative under protocol. My hands started shaking. I pressed them flat against the table to hide it. "We have been in custody of several non-human biological entities for the past 46 years, Vance said, his voice steady, clinical, like he was discussing livestock instead of whatever the hell this was. Most of them died within days or weeks of recovery. Their biology wasn't compatible with our atmosphere, or the trauma of capture killed them, or they simply gave up. We don't know. But this one, NHE7, has survived, thrived even, and over the past 4 decades, we've learned it's capable of communication." I couldn't speak, literally couldn't form words. My mouth had gone completely dry. Vance continued. "Previous attempts at interrogation have been problematic. The entity communicates in ways that bypass normal language centers in the brain. It's not telepathy exactly, but it's close, direct conceptual transfer. And what it chooses to communicate has proven psychologically destabilizing for most interrogators. We've had trained operatives experience complete mental breakdowns after a single session. 3 committed suicide. 5 had to be permanently institutionalized. 2 just stopped functioning. Catatonic. Gone." He paused, letting that sink in. "But there's a pattern to who survives contact and who doesn't. The people who make it through intact all have one thing in common. They have strong, pre-existing belief systems about the nature of reality, consciousness, and existence. Religious frameworks, philosophical foundations. Something that keeps them grounded when everything they think they know gets challenged." "Sir," I finally managed to croak out, "what exactly does this thing say that drives people insane?" Vance looked at me with something like sympathy. "It tells them the truth, Sergeant, about where we come from, about what we are, about why we're here. And for most people, the truth is incompatible with their fundamental understanding of reality. But you grew up with a framework for understanding revelations about the nature of existence. You were taught that there are powers beyond human comprehension, that reality operates on levels we can't fully grasp. That might be the only thing that saves your sanity." He stood up and walked to the door. Your assignment is to establish communication with NHE-7 and extract specific information about its species, their technology, and their intentions regarding humanity. You'll conduct daily sessions until we determine you've gathered sufficient intelligence or until you show signs of psychological compromise, whichever comes first. I stood up, my legs feeling weak. When do I start? I asked. Vance checked his watch. Your first session is scheduled for 0700. That's about 10 minutes from now. I'll escort you to the containment facility, introduce you to the support staff, and show you the communication protocols. After that, you'll be alone with it. Standard session duration is 1 hour, but if you need to terminate early, there's a panic button in the room. Use it if you feel yourself starting to lose coherence. He opened the door and started walking. I followed, my heart hammering so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. Sir, I said, what does it look like? The entity? He stopped walking, turned around, and for the first time since I'd met him, I saw genuine fear in his eyes. You're about to find out, he said. And Sergeant, whatever it shows you, whatever it tells you, whatever you think you see or understand in that room, don't let it break you, because once you're broken, there's no coming back from this. Do you understand? I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. And then we walked down that cold corridor toward a door at the very end, a door marked with biohazard symbols and warnings I couldn't quite read in the dim light. And I knew that in about 5 minutes, everything I believed about the universe was going to change forever. The containment room wasn't what I expected. I don't know what I expected, honestly. Maybe something out of a sci-fi movie, all blinking lights and high-tech displays. Or maybe something medieval, chains and cages like we were holding a demon. But it was neither. It was clean, clinical. The walls were white, not painted white, but some kind of seamless white composite material that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The floor was the same material, slightly textured for grip, and the ceiling was maybe 12 feet high with recessed lighting that gave off a cool, even glow with no shadows anywhere. In the center of the room stood a cylindrical structure about 8 feet tall and maybe 6 feet in diameter. At first glance it looked like glass, but when I got closer I could see it was something else. Some kind of transparent composite, thick, maybe 3 inches, with what looked like microscopic circuitry running through it in patterns that hurt to look at directly. And inside that cylinder, suspended in what appeared to be nothing, just air, was the entity. I stopped walking. Just stopped. My feet wouldn't move forward even though my brain was screaming at them to. Colonel Vance was saying something behind me, explaining protocols or safety measures or something, but his voice sounded like it was coming from underwater, distorted and distant. All I could do was stare at the thing in the cylinder. It wasn't what pop culture had taught me to expect. No big black almond eyes, no gray skin, no classic alien gray appearance that's been plastered across every UFO documentary and conspiracy website for decades. This was something else. Something worse because it was so fundamentally wrong that my brain struggled to even process what I was seeing. You know how sometimes you look at one of those optical illusions and your brain can't decide if it's a vase or 2 faces? That's what looking at this thing felt like, except instead of flipping between 2 interpretations, my brain was cycling through dozens, trying desperately to categorize it as something familiar and failing every single time. The best way I can describe it is this. Imagine something that's partially insect, partially marine life, and partially something so ancient that it predates categories we have words for. Its body was roughly humanoid in the sense that it had a central torso, 4 limbs, and a head, but the proportions were all wrong. Too long in some places, too short in others, like it was designed by someone who had heard a description of humans but never actually seen one. The torso was segmented, not like an insect's exoskeleton, but more subtle, like there were sections that could move independently of each other. The skin, if you could call it skin, was translucent, not quite transparent, but close enough that I could see things moving underneath. Not organs exactly, or at least not organs I recognized, but structures that pulsed and shifted in ways that made my stomach turn. The color was hard to pin down. In certain light it looked almost pearl white. In other angles it had this iridescent quality, showing hints of colors that I don't think exist in normal human perception. But the arms and hands, Jesus Christ, the hands. It had 4 arms, not 2. 2 where you'd expect them, attached to what passed for shoulders, and 2 more that emerged from somewhere around the lower ribcage area. Each arm was too long, joints in places that didn't make anatomical sense, and they ended in hands that had too many fingers. I counted 7 on one hand, maybe 8 on another. I couldn't be sure because they moved in this unsettling way, constantly shifting position like they were underwater or in zero gravity. The fingers were slender, impossibly long, with too many knuckles, and they tapered to points that looked sharp enough to pierce skin. No fingernails, no palm lines, just smooth, translucent flesh that showed the delicate structures underneath. Tendons or nerves or something that served the same purpose in its biology. The head was the worst part. It sat on a neck that was too thin to possibly support it, and it was shaped wrong. Longer than it was wide, almost conical, with the narrow end at the top. No hair, no ears that I could see. Just smooth, translucent skin pulled tight over a skull structure that seemed to have too many angles, too many surfaces that caught the light in ways that hurt to look at. The mouth was barely visible, just a thin line that might have been a slit or might have been sealed shut. I couldn't tell. No nose, just 2 small indentations where a nose might be. And the eyes, oh God, the eyes. They were massive, taking up maybe a third of the head's surface area, and they had no eyelids, no protective membrane, nothing. Just exposed orbs that were too large, too dark, too aware. The color shifted depending on the angle. Sometimes they looked black, sometimes deep purple, sometimes this color that I can only describe as the visual equivalent of a sound you can't quite hear but know is there. Those eyes didn't blink, couldn't blink. They just stared, and even though the entity wasn't looking directly at me yet, even though it seemed to be focused on nothing in particular, I felt watched, observed, studied, like I was a specimen in someone else's lab, which I guess from its perspective, I was. My breathing had gone shallow. I realized I'd been holding my breath and forced myself to inhale, the air tasting metallic and recycled. Colonel Vance was still talking. I could hear his voice now, coming back into focus. Containment field is electromagnetic in nature, not physical. The cylinder is there for our psychological comfort more than actual security. The entity could probably break through if it wanted to, but it's chosen not to. We think it's curious about us, wants to understand us, which is why communication has been possible at all. I managed to tear my eyes away from the entity and look at Vance. You said it's been here since 1979. My voice sounded weird, higher pitched than normal. He nodded. Recovered from a crash site in New Mexico. Not Roswell, that's a different situation. This was outside of Dulce, high desert, middle of nowhere. Local rancher reported lights in the sky, objects falling. By the time our recovery team got there, we found wreckage and this one, still alive. Barely. We've kept it stable for 46 years. I looked back at the entity. 46 years in a cylinder. 46 years of being studied, poked, prodded, interrogated by an endless stream of humans trying to understand what it was. And yet, Vance said it was cooperative. What did that mean? That it answered questions? That it participated in its own captivity? Or something else? The communication apparatus is over here, Vance said, gesturing to a setup in the corner of the room that I hadn't noticed before. It looked like a dentist's chair, that same kind of reclining seat with adjustable headrest. But surrounding it was equipment that looked like it belonged in a neurology lab. A helmet of some kind, covered in sensors and electrodes, wires running to computers and monitors. A control panel with settings I didn't understand. You'll put on the neural interface, Vance explained. It reads your brainwave patterns and translates them into signals the entity can perceive. Simultaneously, it receives signals from the entity and translates them into concepts your brain can process. It's not perfect. Sometimes you'll get images, sometimes emotions, sometimes direct knowledge that feels like it was always in your head. And sometimes, he paused, sometimes you'll experience things that don't translate well into human neurology. That's when people usually start to break. I walked over to the chair, moving like I was in a dream, everything feeling slightly unreal. This couldn't be happening. This couldn't be real, but it was. The chair was real, cold metal and vinyl under my hands. The helmet was real, heavy when Vance helped me lower it onto my head. The electrodes pressed against my scalp were real, slightly uncomfortable, making my skin itch. First session is just establishing contact, Vance said, adjusting something on the control panel. Don't try to ask questions yet. Don't try to push for information. Just let it happen. Let it get a sense of who you are, and you get a sense of what it is. Think of it like meeting someone for the first time. You wouldn't immediately start interrogating them. You'd just be present. He flipped a switch, and the equipment hummed to life. I felt a slight tingling sensation across my scalp. Not painful, but definitely noticeable. "I'll be monitoring from the observation room," Vance said, pointing to a mirror on the wall that was obviously one-way glass. "If you need to stop, just say the word terminate, and I'll shut it down. Try to last the full hour if you can. Good luck, Sergeant." And then he left. The door sealed behind him with a hiss of pressurized air, and I was alone in the room with the entity. Alone, except for the cameras I knew were recording everything. The sensors monitoring my vital signs, and Colonel Vance watching from the other side of that mirror. But it felt alone. Completely, terrifyingly alone. I sat in the chair, the helmet heavy on my head, the tingling sensation spreading from my scalp down into my brain, and I tried to remember my training, establish rapport, stay calm, observe before engaging, all the standard interrogation protocols. But this wasn't standard. Nothing about this was standard. I looked at the entity in its cylinder, still not looking directly at me, still focused on nothing, and I tried to pray. Tried to summon up one of the hundreds of prayers I'd memorized as a kid. The Lord's Prayer, Psalm 23, something, anything. But my mind was blank, empty. Every prayer I'd ever learned, every verse I'd ever memorized, every word of comfort my father had ever taught me. It was all just gone, wiped away by the sheer wrongness of what I was looking at. And that's when it turned its head, slowly, smoothly, with none of the jerky movement you'd expect from a living creature. Just a slow, fluid rotation until those massive, unblinking eyes were pointed directly at me. Not at the room, not at the space where I was sitting. At me, at Marcus Holloway, son of Robert and Sarah Holloway, from Marshall, Texas, who'd read the Bible every Sunday and believed in God and country and thought he understood how the universe worked. Those eyes looked at me, into me, through me, and I felt something I had never felt before in my entire life. Not fear, not exactly. It was more fundamental than fear. It was the feeling of being seen, truly seen, by something so far beyond human understanding that the very act of its attention was like being touched by infinity. And in that moment, with those eyes locked onto mine, and something vast and incomprehensible pressing against my thoughts, like fingers probing the edges of my consciousness, I realized that everything I thought I knew about reality, about existence, about my place in the universe, was about to be destroyed, and there was absolutely nothing I could do to stop it. That first session lasted 17 minutes. Not the full hour Vance had hoped for, not even close. The moment that thing's eyes locked onto mine, something happened inside my head that I still don't have adequate words to describe. It wasn't pain exactly, though there was pressure, like someone was inflating a balloon inside my skull, pushing against the inside of my forehead, my temples, the base of my brain. But more than physical sensation, it was awareness. Sudden, overwhelming awareness that I wasn't alone in my own head anymore. That something else was in there with me, moving through my thoughts like fingers through water, touching memories I didn't know I had, examining experiences I'd forgotten, reading me like I was a book written in a language it had invented. I tried to maintain composure, tried to follow Vance's instructions about staying calm and just being present, but after 17 minutes I heard myself saying, "Terminate," in a voice that didn't sound like mine, and the equipment powered down, and Vance came rushing in to find me crying, not sobbing, just tears streaming down my face while I sat perfectly still, unable to move, unable to explain what had just happened. The technical debriefing afterward was almost as bad as the session itself. They had me sit in a medical evaluation room, while a neurologist ran scans and a psychologist asked me questions about what I'd experienced. How do you explain something that bypasses language? I told them it felt like being examined, like the entity had taken my entire consciousness and held it up to the light, rotating it, studying every angle, every crack, every hidden corner. The psychologist nodded and made notes and asked if I felt violated. I said yes. She asked if I wanted to discontinue the assignment. I said no, even though every fiber of my being was screaming at me to run. But here's the thing. Underneath the terror, underneath the violation of having something alien touch my thoughts, there was curiosity, massive, overwhelming curiosity. Because for those 17 minutes, I had felt something looking back at me, not just observing, but comprehending. understanding me in ways I didn't understand myself. And if it could read me that easily, what could I learn from it? The next session, 2 days later, went slightly better, 23 minutes before I had to terminate. The entity didn't try to probe as deeply this time, or maybe I was getting used to the sensation. The neural interface helmet became more comfortable, or at least familiar. I learned to recognize the feeling of contact, that moment when the entity's consciousness brushed against mine. It felt like standing in a doorway between two rooms, 1 foot in my own mind, and 1 foot in something vast and incomprehensible. The technicians monitoring my sessions started teaching me techniques, how to partition my thoughts, how to create mental boundaries, how to push back when the pressure became too intense. It was like learning to swim by being thrown in the ocean, except the ocean was sentient and studying you while you flailed around trying not to drown. By the end of the first week, I could last full hour-long sessions, but nothing was happening. I mean, contact was happening, that sense of being observed, examined, catalogued, but no communication, no exchange of information, just the entity studying me in silence while I sat in that chair trying every interrogation technique I'd ever learned. I tried building rapport. I know this must be difficult for you being held here. I'm not your enemy. I just want to understand. Nothing. I tried establishing common ground. We're both prisoners here in a way. Neither of us chose this situation. Nothing. I tried direct questioning. Where do you come from? What is your species called? Why are you here? Nothing. Not even acknowledgement that I'd spoken. Just that constant, patient observation, like I was a laboratory animal, and it was waiting to see what I'd do next. Colonel Vance started pressuring me for results. Daily meetings in his office where he'd review my session reports and ask increasingly pointed questions. You've had 7 sessions, Sergeant. What have you learned? Nothing. Has the entity communicated anything at all? No. Do you believe it's capable of communication, or have we been wasting resources for 46 years? I don't know, sir. These meetings were worse than the sessions themselves because at least with the entity, there was a kind of honesty to it. It wasn't pretending to be something it wasn't. But Vance and the other brass, they were pretending this was a normal intelligence operation, that there were standard metrics for success, that I was somehow failing at my job by not getting an alien to talk. How the hell was I supposed to know how to make it talk? Nobody had given me a manual for this. Nobody had training protocols for establishing communication with non-human entities that can read your thoughts. Week 2 started with me changing tactics. I stopped trying to interrogate, stopped asking questions, stopped treating the entity like a hostile subject that needed to be broken down. Instead, I just talked about nothing, about everything. I told it about growing up in Texas, about the heat in summer and the way the air smelled before rain. I told it about my first deployment to Iraq, about the fear and the boredom and the weird camaraderie that develops between soldiers when you're all terrified together. I told it about my father's church, about Sunday services that lasted 3 hours in buildings with no air conditioning, about potluck dinners and vacation Bible school, and all the mundane details of a life it couldn't possibly care about. I wasn't trying to be strategic. I was just filling the silence because the silence was driving me insane, and at least if I was talking, I felt less like a specimen under a microscope. The entity never responded, never moved except for that slow, unsettling respiration that made its torso expand and contract in ways that didn't match human breathing. But I kept talking anyway. On day 9, I told it about my crisis of faith after Iraq, about watching my friend Martinez die from an IED, how he'd been singing Amazing Grace 5 minutes before the explosion because he always sang when he was nervous, and then he was just gone. How I'd prayed over his body while we waited for evac, prayed harder than I'd ever prayed in my life, and felt nothing. No answer, no comfort, just empty sky and the smell of blood and burning metal. I told the entity how I'd stopped going to church after that, how my dad had been disappointed but never pushed, how I'd spent years angry at God for letting good people die in random, meaningless ways. And then I said something I hadn't planned to say, hadn't even consciously thought about. But you know what the weird thing is? I still remember every verse, every prayer, every lesson from Sunday school. My dad made me read the Bible cover to cover every year from age 10 to 18. I hated it at the time, but now I can quote entire chapters from memory. Isn't that stupid? I don't even know if I believe in God anymore, but I can recite the whole book of Genesis without missing a word. That's when everything changed. I felt it immediately, a shift in the quality of attention I was receiving. Before, the entity had been observing me the way you might watch a fish in an aquarium, vaguely interested but detached. Now, suddenly, that attention sharpened, focused. I felt something like curiosity, though that word doesn't quite capture it. More like recognition, maybe. Like I'd said a password I didn't know I was speaking. The pressure in my head increased, not painfully, but noticeably, and then for the first time in 9 days, I received something back through the neural interface. Not words, not images, just a feeling, a concept, a question that bypassed language entirely and planted itself directly into my understanding. You know our work? I sat bolt upright in the chair, my heart hammering. What? What work? What are you talking about? The entity didn't respond, or at least not in any way I could detect. But something had changed fundamentally in the room. The entity was no longer just observing, it was engaged, interested. I pressed forward, trying to capitalize on whatever connection had just formed. What do you mean, your work? What work? Tell me. Nothing again. Just silence, but different silence. Pregnant silence. The kind of silence that comes before something important is about to be said. I was losing the thread. I could feel it slipping away. And in desperation I said, "The Bible." "You're talking about the Bible, aren't you? What does that have to do with you?" And then the entity moved for the first time since I'd started these sessions. Just a small movement, barely perceptible, but after days of complete stillness, it was shocking. Its mouth, that thin line I'd thought might be sealed shut, opened, just slightly, maybe half an inch. And even though no sound came out, even though the entity made no noise that my ears could detect, I heard it. Not heard it, but experienced it, felt it, understood it with a certainty that bypassed all normal sensory input. It was laughing. Not cruelly, not mockingly, but with something like amusement, something like satisfaction, something like a teacher watching a student finally grasp a concept they'd been struggling with. And through the neural interface, clearer than anything I'd received before, came a response that made every hair on my body stand up. We wrote it. I couldn't breathe. Literally could not draw air into my lungs. The room tilted sideways, and I gripped the arms of the chair to keep from falling out of it. "What?" I managed to whisper. "What did you just say?" The entity's mouth closed again, returning to that thin line, but I could still feel it there in my head, feel its presence pressed up against my consciousness. And this time, when it communicated, it was stronger, clearer, impossible to misunderstand. The Bible, the Quran, the Torah, the Vedas, all of them. We wrote them, or rather, we inspired them, guided them, gave your species the words and let you arrange them in ways that made sense to your limited understanding. And you believed them. You built civilizations around them. You killed for them. You died for them. And you never once questioned who might have given them to you. The entity's mouth opened wider this time, and through the neural interface, through that direct connection between its consciousness and mine, I felt it again. That thing that wasn't quite laughter, but close enough that my brain interpreted it that way. And as I sat there, frozen, unable to process what I was hearing, unable to reconcile it with everything I'd ever believed, the entity did something I'll never forget. Something that shouldn't have been possible for a face that was so fundamentally non-human, so alien in its construction, that my brain struggled to parse it as a face at all. It smiled. Not with its mouth. The mouth just opened wider, showing nothing inside, just darkness, but with its eyes, with its entire presence, with something that transcended physical expression and communicated directly into my understanding. It smiled at me the way you'd smile at a child who just discovered something adults have known all along. And in that smile was everything: amusement, pity, satisfaction, and something else. Something that felt like triumph, like it had been waiting 46 years for someone to finally say the right words. And now that I had, now that the door was open, there was no closing it again. I need you to understand something about how this communication worked, because it's important for what comes next. When I say the entity spoke to me, I don't mean it made sounds. There was no voice in the traditional sense, no vibration of air, no words spoken aloud that my ears could detect. Instead, concepts appeared in my mind fully formed, complete with emotional context and layers of meaning that would take paragraphs to express in human language, but arrived instantaneously as pure understanding. It was like remembering something I'd always known but had forgotten, except I'd never known it before. The neural interface translated whatever the entity was transmitting into something my brain could process. but the translation was imperfect, lossy, like trying to describe a symphony using only words. And now that the entity had decided to actually communicate, now that it had opened that channel, the flood of information was overwhelming. I could feel it there, pressed up against my consciousness, waiting, and I knew that whatever was about to happen would change everything. "You read our work?" The question appeared in my mind with a weight that made my chest tight. Not hostile, not mocking, just curious, maybe amused, like running into someone wearing a shirt with your band's logo on it. "Functioning well, I see. Better than we anticipated, actually. You took the framework we provided and built entire civilizations around it. Impressive adaptation, even if you missed the point entirely." I tried to steady my breathing, tried to organize my thoughts into something coherent. The entity could probably sense my confusion anyway. Hell, it was probably reading my thoughts in real time. But I needed to speak, needed to use words to anchor myself to something human. I don't understand what you mean." "What work? What are you talking about?" The sensation that came back was complex, amusement mixed with something like pity, the way a teacher might feel watching a student struggle with a concept that seems obvious to them. "Your religious texts, your holy books, the Bible you mentioned reading, the Quran, the Torah, the Bhagavad Gita, the Vedas, Egyptian mythology, Greek mythology, Sumerian creation stories. Every major religious framework your species has developed over the past 6,000 years. A pause, or what felt like a pause, a moment of weight and significance. We wrote them, all of them. Or more accurately, we provided the source material and let your kind interpret it through your cultural lenses. Different languages, different metaphors, different emphasis, but the same core programming underneath. And you believed it. Every word. You built temples and churches and mosques. You created hierarchies of priests and prophets. You went to war over interpretations. You died for it, killed for it, and you never once questioned where these stories actually came from. My first reaction was anger, pure instinctive rage that shot through me like electricity. "You're lying," I said it out loud, heard my own voice echo in the sterile chamber. "That's bullshit. You're trying to manipulate me, mess with my head, make me doubt." The entity interrupted with a sensation that felt like a hand gently but firmly placed over my mouth, stopping the words before they could escalate into shouting. "Why would we lie, Marcus Holloway?" It used my name, somehow knowing my full name, even though I'd never spoken it in these sessions. "What would we gain from deception? Look at where I am. Look at where you are. I am contained in a cylinder, 7 levels beneath your desert, studied and interrogated by your species for nearly half a century. You are the one with power in this dynamic. You can walk away. I cannot. What possible strategic advantage would lying give me? The logic of that hit me like cold water. It was right. What did it gain from lying? If anything, telling the truth, assuming this was the truth, would only make us more hostile, more likely to keep it locked up forever, maybe even kill it. Unless you're trying to break me," I said. "Vance told me that's what happens to interrogators down here. They talk to you and they break, go insane, kill themselves. Maybe that's your goal, psychological warfare. Make us question everything until we can't function anymore." The amusement came back, stronger this time, almost affectionate. "Some of your predecessors did break, yes, but not because I was trying to break them. They broke because they couldn't reconcile what they learned with what they believed. Their minds constructed reality in a very specific way, and when presented with information that contradicted that construction, they fragmented. You call it cognitive dissonance. We have a different term for it, but the concept is the same. But you, Marcus, you might survive this. Do you know why?" I didn't answer. Couldn't. My throat was too tight, my mind racing through implications I didn't want to examine. The entity continued. "Because you already doubted. You told me yourself. You don't know if you believe in God anymore. Your faith was damaged by experience, by witnessing the randomness of death, by praying to silence. You've already done the hard work of questioning. That gives you flexibility, adaptability. The truly faithful, the ones who never doubted, never questioned, those are the ones who shattered when confronted with truth. But you, that sensation like a smile again. You might actually be able to handle this. Shall we find out? So explain it to me," I said, forcing the words out. "If you wrote the Bible, if you wrote all of it, explain how, explain why, make it make sense." The pressure in my head increased, not painful but intense, like the entity was gathering itself, preparing to transmit something large and complex. Your species emerged roughly 300,000 years ago. Anatomically modern humans, yes, but not cognitively modern. Not yet. You were animals. Clever animals, tool users, social, but animals nonetheless. No language beyond grunts and gestures. No art. No culture. No conception of past or future, just present moment survival. You would have stayed that way, would have remained apex predators, but nothing more except we found you. My kind, you don't have a word for what we are, but the closest translation would be shepherds, or perhaps gardeners. We travel, we observe, we study developing species across your galaxy and others. Most we leave alone. They evolve, they thrive, or they die out, and we simply watch. But occasionally, very occasionally, we find a species that shows potential, the capacity for something beyond mere survival. Your species showed that potential. So approximately 50,000 of your years ago, we began an experiment. We gave you gifts. Not technology, you weren't ready for that, but concepts, abstract thinking, language, self-awareness, the ability to plan for tomorrow, to remember yesterday, to imagine things that don't exist and then bring them into being. We accelerated your cognitive evolution, took something that would have happened naturally over another million years, and compressed it into a few thousand. The information kept coming, relentless, each concept building on the last. And it worked beautifully, too beautifully perhaps. You developed language, then art, then culture, then civilization. You went from living in caves to building cities in what was, to us, an eye blink of time. But there was a problem. All that cognitive capability, all that self-awareness and abstract thinking came with side effects we hadn't fully anticipated. You became anxious, neurotic. You understood that you would die, and that knowledge terrified you. You saw patterns in randomness and created paranoid explanations. You fought each other over resources, over territory, over abstract concepts like honor and pride. You were brilliant and creative and violent and self-destructive all at once, and we realized that left to your own devices, you would probably destroy yourselves before reaching your full potential. So, we intervened again, more carefully this time, more subtly. We appeared to your ancestors at key moments in your development, and we gave them rules, frameworks, stories that would shape how you understood reality, how you treated each other, how you organized your societies. We presented ourselves as gods, as angels, as divine messengers, whatever local metaphor made sense for the culture we were influencing. And we gave them texts, instructions. Sometimes we spoke them directly and let your prophets transcribe them. Sometimes we provided physical objects, tablets, scrolls, whatever the technology of the time allowed. The content varied based on what each culture needed, but the underlying purpose was always the same. Give humanity a structure. Give them rules that would prevent self-destruction. Give them meaning and purpose that would channel their anxiety and violence into something productive. I wanted to interrupt, wanted to argue, but the entity wasn't finished. The Ten Commandments? A simplified legal code designed to prevent the most common sources of societal breakdown. Don't kill each other. Don't steal. Don't lie in ways that destroy trust. Honor your parents so knowledge passes between generations. Basic rules for a species that was very good at hurting itself. The concept of an all-seeing God who judges your actions. A mechanism for enforcing social behavior when no external authority is watching. The promise of an afterlife. A way to reduce death anxiety and make you more willing to sacrifice short-term gains for long-term stability. The idea that you're special, chosen, made in God's image. A way to give you purpose and meaning in a universe that is, objectively, indifferent to your existence. Every major religious concept, every moral framework, every promise of divine reward or punishment, all of it was designed by us, calibrated to your psychology, intended to keep you stable long enough to reach the next stage of development. And it worked. You built civilizations that lasted centuries. You created art and philosophy and science. You stopped being quite so murderous to each other, at least within your own groups. You developed ethics and laws and complex social structures. The experiment was succeeding, but the entity paused again, and this time I felt something else underneath the communication. Something like regret, maybe, or disappointment. We underestimated how literally you would take it, how rigidly you would interpret metaphors we intended to be flexible, how violently you would defend interpretations of texts we'd meant to evolve with your understanding. The wars fought over religion, the persecution the dogma that prevented scientific progress. Those were side effects we didn't fully anticipate. You were supposed to eventually outgrow the need for these frameworks, the way children outgrow fairy tales. But instead, you ossified them, made them unchangeable, sacred. You stopped seeing them as tools and started seeing them as absolute truth. I sat there, my hands gripping the chair arms so hard my knuckles were white, and something in me broke. Not shattered like Vance had described happening to other interrogators, but broke open, like a dam giving way. Because here's the terrible thing. It made sense. Every word of it made perfect, horrible sense. The inconsistencies in religious texts that scholars had debated for centuries. The similarities between different religions that had supposedly developed independently. The way religious rules seemed perfectly calibrated to solve specific social problems. The weird, specific prohibitions that made sense in ancient contexts, but seemed arbitrary now. The anthropomorphic God who acted suspiciously like a parent managing difficult children. The promises and threats that perfectly exploited human psychology. All of it. Every piece that had never quite fit together in Sunday school. Every question my father had answered with, "It's a mystery of faith." Every doubt I'd ever had that I'd pushed down because questioning felt like betrayal. It all suddenly had an explanation. And the explanation was that the entire foundation of human spirituality was a constructed experiment by beings who saw us as, what? Lab rats? Pets? Children who needed guidance? No, I said, but my voice had no conviction in it. No, you're lying. You have to be lying. Because if you're not, if this is real, then... I couldn't finish the sentence. Couldn't speak the conclusion out loud because saying it would make it real. But the entity finished it for me. Its presence gentle now, almost kind, which somehow made it worse. If we're not lying, then everything you believed about your place in the universe is wrong. You're not special. You're not chosen. You're not made in God's image because the God you worship was us, or at least our intervention, translated through the limited understanding of Bronze Age humans who didn't have language for concepts like extraterrestrial intelligence, or genetic manipulation, or social engineering. You're not the center of creation. You're not even particularly unique. You're one of dozens of species we've shepherded over the millennia. And honestly, you're not even the most successful example. The entity's presence pressed closer, and I could feel something like sympathy radiating from it. But Marcus, here's what you need to understand. None of that means you're not valuable. None of that means your life doesn't matter. You're still you. Your experiences are still real. Your love, your fear, your hopes, your pain, all of that is genuine. The only thing that's changed is your understanding of where you came from and why you're here. And perhaps that's better. Perhaps knowing the truth, even if it's uncomfortable, is preferable to living inside a comfortable lie. I couldn't answer, couldn't speak. My mind was spinning, trying to process information that was too large, too fundamental, too devastating to fully contain. And through it all, one thought kept repeating, wait until the colonel hears this. Wait until the brass hears this. Wait until anyone hears this. Because if what this entity was saying was true, if it could prove it, if this wasn't some elaborate mindfuck designed to break me, then everything was about to change. Not just for me, for everyone, for all of humanity. And I was sitting at ground zero of the revelation that would destroy every religion, every faith, every belief system that billions of people had built their lives around. And I had no idea whether that would free us or destroy us, maybe both. I don't know how long I sat there in silence after that initial revelation. Could have been seconds, could have been minutes. Time felt weird in that room, elastic, like it was stretching and compressing based on the weight of what I was learning. Eventually, I managed to force words out. How long? My voice cracked. How long has your species been doing this? How long have you been shepherding us? The response came with layers of meaning that my brain struggled to process. Deep time, geological time, spans of existence so vast that human history was barely a blip. Our species achieved what you would call consciousness approximately 4 million of your years ago. We developed technology, left our home world, began exploring this region of space roughly 2 million years ago. We are old, Marcus, ancient by your standards. We have watched stars be born and die. We have seen species emerge from primordial oceans and evolve into spacefaring civilizations, only to destroy themselves or fade into extinction. We have learned patience. And you've been coming to Earth all this time? I asked. The entity's presence shifted slightly. and I got the sense it was choosing how much to tell me, calibrating its response to what my mind could handle. Not continuously. We discovered your planet approximately 200,000 years ago during a survey mission. At the time, your species had just diverged from other hominids. You were interesting, but unremarkable. Tool users, social structure, but not significantly different from other intelligent species we'd observed. We cataloged you and moved on. But we returned periodically to check on your progress. 100,000 years ago, 75,000 years ago, 50,000 years ago. And that's when we noticed the potential. Something had changed in your neurological development. A mutation, perhaps, or multiple mutations, that gave you the capacity for what you call symbolic thinking. You could imagine things that didn't exist. You could plan. You could create art. You could lie to each other, which requires a sophisticated understanding of other minds. You were on the threshold of something remarkable, so you decided to play God? The bitterness in my voice surprised me. The entity didn't react defensively, just continued with that same patient, almost clinical tone. We decided to accelerate a process that was already happening naturally. Think of it like selective breeding, but for cognitive traits. We didn't change your DNA directly. That would have been too invasive, too risky. Instead, we provided environmental pressure. We taught your ancestors language structure, fire manipulation, agriculture, astronomy. Each generation, we would appear to your most cognitively advanced individuals and give them knowledge slightly beyond what they could have discovered on their own. Then we'd leave and let you develop it further. Come back a few generations later and give you more. Push, retreat, guiding your evolution without completely controlling it. The information kept flowing, and I was furiously trying to organize it in my mind, trying to create a timeline, trying to make it concrete. When did you start the religious intervention? When did you start writing the texts? The entity's presence intensified, and I felt something like memory transmission. Not my memories, but fragments of its experiences, coming through the neural interface in flashes that made my head pound. The first major intervention was in what you now call Sumer, approximately 6,000 years ago. Your species had just invented writing, cuneiform pressed into clay tablets, and you were using it primarily for accounting, tracking grain stores, recording trade. But we recognized the potential. Written language meant information could be preserved across generations, could be standardized, could be spread. So we appeared to their priests, gave them stories, creation myths, the Epic of Gilgamesh, which you may recognize as the template for later flood narratives. We established the concept of divine kings, rulers whose authority came from the gods, from us. It was a test case. Could written religious doctrine create stable civilization? And it worked, I asked. Oh, it worked beautifully. The Sumerian civilization flourished for over a millennium. Writing spread to other cultures. So we replicated the experiment. Egypt, 5,000 years ago. We appeared as gods, Ra, Osiris, Thoth, and gave them a pantheon, a religious structure, and the motivation to build. The pyramids weren't just tombs, Marcus. They were proof of concept. Could religious devotion motivate massive engineering projects? Could the promise of an afterlife make people accept social hierarchy without constant rebellion? Yes, and yes. Then the Indus Valley civilization, then China, then Mesoamerica. Each time, we provided the initial framework and let your species elaborate on it. Different cultural expressions, different metaphors, but the same underlying mechanisms. Fear of divine punishment, hope for divine reward, rules that promoted social cohesion. It worked every single time. But the most sophisticated intervention was in the Middle East, roughly 3,500 years ago. The entity's presence grew heavier, more focused. This was when we introduced monotheism. One God, instead of many. Why? Because polytheistic systems create conflict. My God versus your God. My city versus your city. But one universal God. One unified moral framework. That could potentially unite larger populations. We appeared to a man you call Moses. He was leading a group of refugees out of Egypt, and they were disorganized, fractious, barely holding together as a cohesive unit. So we gave him laws, what you know as the 10 Commandments. But Marcus, it wasn't stone tablets that appeared on Mount Sinai. It was a holographic projection device, about the size of your tablet computers, displaying text in Hebrew characters that we'd observed them using. Moses thought he was seeing the finger of God writing on stone. He was actually seeing focused light particles arranged to form letters, technology so far beyond his understanding that his brain interpreted it as supernatural. My stomach was churning. You're telling me the 10 Commandments, the foundation of Western law, of Christian and Jewish ethics, came from an alien tablet computer? The entity's amusement rippled through the connection. Simplified for his understanding, yes. We knew humans responded well to written authority. We knew that physical objects, especially stone, which symbolized permanence, carried weight in your cultures. So we made him believe he was receiving stone tablets from God. Then we did it again with other prophets. Muhammad received what you call the Quran, but he described the experience as an angel, Jibril, appearing to him in a cave and commanding him to read. He was illiterate at the time, but the knowledge appeared in his mind fully formed. Do you understand what he was actually experiencing? Neural interface technology, cruder than what you're using now, but the same basic principle. We transmitted information directly into his brain, bypassing normal sensory input, and his consciousness interpreted it as angelic visitation because he had no framework for understanding technological telepathy. Every major religious event in your history follows the same pattern, the entity continued. Burning bushes that spoke to prophets, focused energy projections with audio transmission, angels appearing to shepherds, our scouts in vessels that your ancestors interpreted as divine beings because they'd never seen aircraft, the parting of the Red Sea, tidal manipulation technology, or possibly just really good timing with natural tidal patterns that we knew were coming. The 10 plagues of Egypt, combination of ecological knowledge. We knew a drought was coming that would trigger algae blooms, insect swarms, livestock disease, and some direct intervention with your water supply and atmospheric conditions. Resurrection events? Advanced medical technology applied to individuals in death-like states. Every miracle, every divine intervention, every supernatural event that your religions are built upon can be explained by sufficiently advanced technology being witnessed by people who had no concept of technology beyond wheels and fire. I felt like I was going to vomit. Actually felt bile rising in my throat and had to swallow it down. So Jesus, the resurrection, the miracles, walking on water, healing the sick, the entity's presence gentled slightly, like it could sense how close I was to breaking. We were not directly involved in the Jesus narrative. That was primarily your own mythology building on itself. But some of his followers likely encountered our technology, healing devices that they interpreted as divine power, maybe a vessel they thought was heavenly light. The resurrection story is more complex. There are scenarios where advanced medical intervention could create the appearance of death followed by revival, or it could be entirely fabricated, legend building on legend the way your oral traditions work. We don't have complete records of every intervention. We're observers and guides, not omniscient. Some of what you attribute to divine action was actually us. Some was natural phenomena you didn't understand. And some was just human imagination filling gaps in ways that reinforced existing belief structures. Prove it. The words came out harder than I intended, almost aggressive. Prove any of this. Because right now, this could all be bullshit. This could be you mind-fucking me exactly like Vance warned, breaking me down with elaborate stories that sound plausible but aren't real. If you really wrote the Bible, if you really created these religions, prove it. Show me something I can verify. Show me something that isn't just telepathic storytelling. The silence that followed felt different, anticipatory, almost dangerous. The entity's presence withdrew slightly, and through the neural interface I felt it considering, calculating, deciding. You want proof, it finally responded. Physical, verifiable evidence that what I'm telling you is true. I can provide that. But Marcus, once I show you, once you see it, you will never be able to unsee it. The doubt you're clinging to right now, that small voice that says, maybe this is all manipulation, maybe none of this is real, that doubt is the last protection your psyche has. Once I remove it, once you know with certainty that everything I've said is true, you will have to live with that knowledge forever. Are you sure you want that? I hesitated. For a long moment I actually considered saying no, considered ending the session right there, maintaining that thin cushion of uncertainty. But I knew I couldn't. I was too far in. I needed to know. Show me, I said. The entity's presence surged forward, and the pressure in my head increased dramatically. Very well, I'm going to transmit coordinates to you. There is a location in the Sinai Peninsula, buried under sand and rock, that contains artifacts from our intervention with Moses. Your government knows about it. They recovered some materials in the 1970s during a covert archaeological operation, and classified everything at levels above what most presidents can access. The artifacts are stored in a facility adjacent to this one in Sector 6, Level 9. They include fragments of the device Moses saw, crystalline storage media containing genetic records of individuals we monitored, and documentation in our language that your linguists haven't been able to translate, but that your AI systems have partially decoded. Ask Colonel Vance about Project Testament. Ask him about the crystalline fragments that emit light when exposed to specific radio frequencies. Ask him about the genetic samples that don't match any known human population, but are close enough to human DNA to have clearly interbred with your species. Ask him why there's a 200-foot section of Level 9 that requires presidential authorization to access, and why only 6 people currently living have ever seen what's inside. The information flooded my mind with absolute clarity, coordinates and file numbers and security protocols. All of it transmitted directly into my memory like it had always been there. I knew with complete certainty that if I asked Vance about Project Testament, he would react. He might deny it, might refuse to answer, but he would react. The entity would only give me information that specific if it was real. There's more, the entity continued, and now its presence felt heavy, oppressive, like storm clouds pressing down. I'm going to show you something else. A memory. Not mine directly. I wasn't present for this event, but recorded data from one of our observation teams. This happened 3,500 years ago, on a mountain that you now call Mount Sinai. You're going to experience it the way our team recorded it. You'll see what Moses saw, but you'll also see the truth behind it. Are you ready? I wasn't. I absolutely wasn't ready. But I said yes anyway because what other choice did I have? The entity's presence enveloped my consciousness completely, and suddenly I wasn't in the containment room anymore. I was standing on a mountain at night, stars blazing overhead with a clarity I'd never seen in my life because there was no light pollution, no atmospheric haze, just pure ancient sky. And below me on a plateau I could see a man kneeling, face pressed to the ground, trembling. Moses. I was seeing Moses, but I was also seeing what he couldn't see. The invisible vessel hovering 30 feet above the plateau, scanning him, monitoring his vitals, projecting the holographic display that appeared in front of him, as if emerging from the mountain itself, glowing letters in ancient Hebrew, each command appearing one at a time. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make idols. You shall not take the Lord's name in vain. One after another the commandments appeared while Moses watched in awe and terror, believing he was witnessing the literal finger of God, never knowing he was seeing projected light particles arranged by beings who were studying his species the way we study lab animals. And then the perspective shifted, and I was inside the vessel, seeing Moses from above through instruments that analyzed his brain chemistry, his heart rate, his cortisol levels, his neurological response to the stimuli. I could feel, the communication between the team members, concepts that my brain translated roughly as: subject is responding well to visual authority stimulus. Dopamine and serotonin levels indicate religious ecstasy response. Memory formation is strong. This experience will become foundational to his belief system. Recommend proceeding with full commandment transmission. And they were pleased, satisfied with their experiment. They were deliberately creating one of the most important religious moments in human history, and to them, it was just data collection. Just another entry in a project log about primitive species manipulation. The memory ended, and I was back in my body, back in the chair, back in the containment room, gasping for air like I'd been underwater, and I was crying, tears streaming down my face, my whole body shaking, because I had just seen proof. Undeniable, absolute proof that everything I'd been told was true. The Bible wasn't written by God. It was written by them, by aliens conducting a social engineering experiment. And every prayer I'd ever prayed, every Sunday school lesson, every moment of faith I'd ever experienced, it was all based on a lie, a calculated, deliberate lie told to keep humanity manageable. And I didn't know if I could survive knowing that. After that memory transmission, I needed a break. Actually needed it, not just wanted it. I pulled the neural interface helmet off with shaking hands and sat there trying to remember how to breathe normally. Colonel Vance came in through the observation door, took one look at my face, and immediately called for a medic. They checked my vitals, blood pressure through the roof, heart rate at 140, pupils dilated, and recommended terminating the session, but I refused. I needed to keep going. Needed to verify what I'd just experienced before my rational mind could convince me it was all hallucination or manipulation. "Give me 10 minutes, I told Vance. "Then I'm going back in." He looked at me like I was insane, which maybe I was, but he nodded. Those 10 minutes, I spent pacing the observation room, drinking water I couldn't taste, trying to organize my thoughts into something coherent. When I went back into the containment room and put the helmet back on, the entity was waiting, its presence patient and calm like it had known I'd return. "You showed me Moses," I said, my voice still unsteady. "Show me more. Tell me things I can verify, because that memory could have been fabricated. You could be feeding me elaborate illusions through this neural interface, and I'd have no way of knowing. I need something concrete, something I can check against records, against evidence, against physical reality." The entity's presence shifted, and I felt something like approval. "You're thinking like a scientist now instead of a believer. Good. That will help you survive what comes next." "Very well. Let me tell you about the Book of Enoch." I felt my face scrunch in confusion. "The what?" The amusement came through clearly. "Exactly. You don't know it because it's not in your Bible. It was removed, declared apocryphal, hidden away by early church councils who found its content problematic. But it exists. It's referenced in other biblical texts. Jude quotes from it directly, and fragments were found among the Dead Sea Scrolls. The book describes angels descending to earth, teaching humans forbidden knowledge, and interbreeding with human women to create the Nephilim, giants, hybrid beings. Your religious authorities rejected it because it contradicted the narrative they wanted to maintain about the purity of divine creation. But Marcus, the Book of Enoch is a historical record. The angels it describes were us. The forbidden knowledge was technology, metallurgy, astronomy, mathematics, cosmetics, even weapon making. And the Nephilim? The entity paused, and I felt something dark underneath its communication, something like regret. Those were real, genetic experiments. We were trying to create a hybrid species that combined your adaptability with our enhanced cognitive capabilities. It failed. The hybrids were physiologically unstable. Most died young, and the ones who survived were problematic, violent, difficult to control. Your myths describe them as giants, which is partially accurate. Some grew to over 8 feet tall due to growth hormone dysregulation. But the real issue was neurological. We gave them too much, too fast. Their brains couldn't integrate the modifications. They were essentially organic machines designed for a purpose we eventually abandoned. The information was coming faster now, each revelation building on the last. In the Book of Enoch, the fallen angels are punished by God for their transgression. In reality, our Oversight Council terminated the hybrid program and ordered the specimens destroyed. The flood narrative, which appears in multiple cultures, not just Hebrew, is a mythologized memory of that purge. We didn't flood the entire planet, obviously, but we did use localized geological manipulation to trigger catastrophic flooding in regions where hybrid populations were concentrated. The Black Sea deluge approximately 7,500 years ago, the flooding of Mesopotamian river valleys. These were targeted elimination events designed to remove the failed experiments while preserving baseline human populations. Your ancestors remembered it as divine punishment for sin. They weren't entirely wrong. We were punishing ourselves for the sin of careless creation. And a few humans survived to tell the story, which became Noah, Utnapishtim, Manu, depending on the culture. I wanted to call bullshit, wanted to dismiss it as elaborate science fiction. But then the entity did something that made my skin crawl. It transmitted specific information directly into my memory. Names, dates, locations. There is a facility in Colorado under Cheyenne Mountain that houses artifacts your government recovered from a site in Ethiopia in 1987. They were excavating near the supposed location of the Garden of Eden. Yes, that's a real place. Or was, in what's now southeastern Turkey and northern Iraq, a region that 12,000 years ago had the perfect climate for early agriculture. And they found something. Skeletal remains, 7 feet tall, bone density twice that of modern humans, skull capacity 20% larger, and DNA that was human but wrong. Contaminated, they called it. Chimeric. They carbon dated it to approximately 8,000 years old, which shouldn't be possible because your species didn't have the medical knowledge to create genetic hybrids back then. Except you didn't create them. We did. The remains are stored in Vault CM017, classified under Project Goliath. and only 12 people in your government know they exist. Ask Colonel Vance about Project Goliath, the entity continued. Watch his reaction, or better yet, access the classified database yourself. Your clearance is Umbra 7. That should be sufficient to view summary documents, if not the full files. Look for DNA analysis reports showing human-based genome with inserted sequences that match no terrestrial organism. Look for the photographs of the skull with the sagittal crest that shouldn't exist in modern humans but does in these specimens. Look for the internal memo from 1988, where a geneticist wrote that the modification patterns looked designed and intentional and was immediately removed from the project and discredited. The specificity was overwhelming. File numbers, vault designations, names of researchers. This wasn't vague prophecy or unfalsifiable claims. This was concrete information I could actually check. And if you want something even more verifiable, the entity pressed on, let me tell you about the Exodus, the parting of the Red Sea. Your Bible says Moses raised his staff and God divided the waters so the Israelites could cross on dry land. Spectacular miracle, impossible by natural means. Except it wasn't a miracle and it wasn't the Red Sea. That's a translation error. The original Hebrew says Yam Suf, which means Sea of Reeds, likely a marshy area in the Nile Delta or near the Bitter Lakes. And we didn't divide water. We generated a localized gravitational repulsion field that pushed water molecules away from a specific area for approximately 40 minutes, long enough for roughly 2,000 people to cross. The technology is similar to what your species is just beginning to explore in quantum field manipulation, except our version is stable and scalable. The evidence is still there, Marcus. Your own military scientists have conducted ground-penetrating radar surveys of the region and found something anomalous. A straight path across what would have been underwater, approximately 500 meters long, with compressed sediment layers that show signs of rapid desiccation and reconsolidation. The surveys are classified, conducted in 1995 by DARPA in cooperation with Israeli intelligence. They couldn't explain what they found, so they buried it. Literally. They backfilled the area with sand to prevent further excavation and declared it a military exclusion zone. The data exists in Pentagon archives under Project Exodus verification, with analysis suggesting unknown technology created the pathway. Your scientists concluded it was evidence of advanced ancient civilization. They were half right. It was advanced technology, just not ancient human technology. I felt sick, physically, viscerally sick. The entity kept transmitting information. More details, more locations, more classified project names, and each one felt like a hammer blow to my remaining sanity. The Ark of the Covenant? A portable energy generation device we provided to Hebrew priests, misunderstood as a religious relic. The burning bush? A localized plasma containment field used to get Moses' attention without harming him. The pillar of fire that led the Israelites through the desert? An aerial drone with bioluminescent navigation beacon. The manna from heaven? A nutrient-rich algae paste we synthesized and delivered via atmospheric seeding, primitive food aid to keep them alive during migration. Every miracle had a technical explanation. Every divine intervention was just sufficiently advanced technology observed by people who had no framework for understanding what they were seeing. Verify it, the entity urged. Take what I've told you and verify it against your classified databases. You'll find that every piece of information I've provided is corroborated by evidence your own government has recovered and hidden. They know, Marcus. The people at the highest levels of your military and intelligence apparatus know that religious history doesn't match the physical evidence. They know that archaeological sites contain technological artifacts that predate human civilization. They know that genetic analysis of ancient remains shows signs of deliberate modification. They've known for decades, and they've kept it secret, because releasing that information would collapse social order. How do you tell 7 billion people that their religions are cargo cults, that they've been worshipping misunderstood technology, that their entire spiritual foundation is based on alien intervention? You don't. You classify it at levels above presidential access and you pray, ironically, that nobody pieces it together. That session ended when I vomited, just leaned over and emptied my stomach onto the floor of the containment room. Bile and coffee and nothing else because I hadn't eaten that morning. The medics came back. Vance came back. Everyone looked concerned, but not surprised. This is normal, Vance said quietly as they helped me out of the chair. Every interrogator who makes it past first contact goes through this phase. The entity gives you information that your mind can't reconcile with your worldview, and your body rejects it, literally rejects it. You'll feel better in a few hours, or you won't. That's when we'll know if you can continue. But I knew I had to continue, because even as I was being helped out of the containment room, even as I was doubled over and shaking, my analytical mind was already working, already cataloging the information I'd received, already planning how to verify it. That night, I couldn't sleep, kept thinking about everything the entity had told me. Around 0200, I got up and went to the secure terminal in my quarters. Everyone at my clearance level had one, for accessing classified databases without leaving our rooms. I logged in and started searching. Project Goliath, restricted, but my Umbra 7 clearance gave me access to summary documents. And there it was. Skeletal remains, anomalous DNA, Ethiopia excavation, 1987, Vault CM017. Everything the entity had said, confirmed in cold bureaucratic language in official government documents. My hands were shaking as I searched for the next one. Project Exodus verification, restricted, summary access granted. DARPA survey, 1995. Ground penetrating radar, anomalous pathway formation, unknown technology, evidence of rapid sediment desiccation, military exclusion zone established. Jesus Christ, it was all real. I spent 4 hours that night going through everything I could access, every project name and file number the entity had provided, and every single one checked out. Not vague correlations, perfect matches, information I could not have known, that nobody outside the highest levels of classification could have known, all confirmed in documents that predated my arrival at Groom Lake by years or decades. The entity wasn't lying. It wasn't manipulating me with clever guesses or psychological tricks. It was telling me the absolute truth, backed by evidence my own government had collected and hidden. And that truth was destroying everything I thought I understood about human history, about religion, about the nature of reality itself. I sat there at that terminal as the sun rose somewhere above ground, though I couldn't see it 7 levels below the desert, and I understood why previous interrogators had broken. This knowledge was too big, too fundamental, too devastating. It was like learning that your entire life was a play and someone just showed you the script. But as terrible as all of this was, as much as it shattered my faith and my understanding of humanity's place in the universe, I had a creeping sense that I still hadn't reached the bottom, that the entity was building to something worse. Because every revelation so far had been about the past, about what they'd done to us thousands of years ago, about how they'd shaped our religions and our civilizations. But it had also mentioned that the experiment was over, that they'd learned what they needed to learn. And I hadn't asked the obvious follow-up question. If the experiment was over, what happened next? What did they do with species they'd finished studying? I had a terrible feeling that I was about to find out. And that compared to what was coming, learning that the Bible was written by aliens would seem like the easy part. The next session, I came in angry, not scared, not broken, angry. I'd spent the previous night confirming that everything this thing had told me was true, which meant I'd also spent that night confronting the fact that my entire species had been manipulated for millennia, that every prayer my father had ever taught me was addressed to beings who saw us as lab animals. I sat down in that chair, put on the neural interface helmet, and before the entity could even establish full connection, I asked the question that had been burning in my mind since our last session. Why? My voice was hard. Controlled fury. Why the hell did you do this to us? Why create religions? Why manipulate our entire development? What gives you the right to fuck with an entire species for thousands of years? Answer me that. The entity's presence didn't recoil from my anger. If anything, it seemed to welcome it, like my rage was a sign of progress, evidence that I was processing rather than breaking. The right? The concept came through tinged with something that might have been amusement, or might have been something darker. We didn't ask permission, if that's what you mean. When a farmer plants a garden, does he ask the soil for consent? When a scientist cultures bacteria, does she consult the bacteria about experimental protocols? You're thinking about this in terms of ethics, Marcus, but you're applying ethical frameworks that only exist because we created them. The concept of informed consent, of individual autonomy, of inherent rights. Those are social constructs we helped you develop specifically because we needed you to develop them. Before our intervention, your species operated on pure might makes right, survival of the strongest. You were violent, territorial, driven entirely by instinct and immediate gratification. So you controlled us, I said flatly. You decided we were too violent, too dangerous to ourselves, and you put us on a leash. The leash just happened to be invisible, made of guilt and fear and promises of hell or heaven. Behavioral conditioning dressed up as divine revelation. The entity's presence shifted, and I felt something like approval, pride. Now you're beginning to understand, yes, control. That's what all of this was always about. Your species had two paths forward 50,000 years ago when you developed advanced cognition. Path 1, unconstrained development, leading almost certainly to self-destruction. Your cognitive capabilities evolved faster than your emotional regulation. You gained the ability to imagine the future, to plan, to create complex tools and weapons, but you still had the fear response and territorial aggression of apex predators. Left alone, you would have developed weapons capable of wiping out your species within a few thousand years, and you would have used them. We've seen it happen to 17 other species, promising civilizations that tore themselves apart the moment they achieved nuclear fission or biological warfare capabilities. Path 2, the entity continued, was guided development. We give you rules, frameworks, mental structures that create inhibitions against your most destructive impulses. Don't kill, don't steal, love your neighbor, honor your parents, fear divine punishment, hope for eternal reward. These aren't just arbitrary commandments, Marcus. They're carefully designed psychological constraints that hijack your neural reward systems and redirect antisocial impulses toward pro-social behavior. Religion isn't the opiate of the masses. It's the behavioral modification program that kept the masses from annihilating themselves, while their technological capabilities outpaced their wisdom. The way it explained this, so clinical and matter-of-fact, made my stomach turn. We weren't partners in some cosmic drama. We were test subjects, lab rats in the biggest Skinner box ever constructed. So all of it, I said slowly. All of human religion, all of our moral frameworks, our ethics, our laws, our entire civilization. It was just, what? Livestock management. Is that what we are to you? Livestock? The entity's presence intensified, pressing closer, and I felt something complicated underneath its response. Layers of meaning that my brain struggled to parse. You're not livestock. Livestock are raised for consumption or labor. You're an experiment, a study in directed evolution. Our research question was this: can a violent, short-lived species with limited cognitive capabilities be guided to develop sustainable civilization? Can they transcend their base programming through internalized behavioral constraints? Can they be taught to cooperate instead of compete, to think long-term instead of reacting to immediate threats, to value the collective over the individual? Can primates become something more than primates? The question hung in the air between us, and I realized with a chill that this was the core of everything. Not, are there intelligent aliens, but can smart animals become wise enough to survive themselves? We were the answer to a question being asked by beings who'd watched species after species develop consciousness and then destroy themselves with it. And the method, I said bitterly, was to invent God, to make us think we were being watched by an all-knowing authority who would punish us for being what we naturally are. Fear-based conditioning on a species-wide scale for thousands of years. The entity didn't deny it. Fear and hope, punishment and reward. The same mechanisms you use to train dogs, yes, but applied with sophistication and patience across hundreds of generations. And it worked, Marcus. That's what you need to understand. It worked. Did it? I challenged. Because from where I'm sitting, humanity is still pretty fucked up. We still have wars. We still murder and steal and rape and genocide. We still have nuclear weapons pointed at each other. Your experiment didn't fix us. We're still violent animals. Just violent animals who feel guilty about it afterward. The entity's presence pulsed with something that felt like satisfaction. Like I'd said exactly what it wanted me to say. But you're still here. That's the key data point. 50,000 years of development. 6,000 years of recorded civilization. 80 years since you developed nuclear weapons. And you haven't destroyed yourselves. Yes, you still wage war. Yes, you still harm each other. But the rate has decreased. The scale has decreased. The percentage of your population dying from violence has dropped from approximately 15% in prehistoric times to less than 1% now. You've developed international laws, human rights frameworks, institutions designed to prevent global conflict. It's messy, it's imperfect, but you're trending towards stability instead of extinction. The experiment succeeded. I sat with that for a moment, trying to process what success meant from their perspective. We hadn't become perfect. We hadn't transcended violence or achieved enlightenment. We'd just survived, limped forward with enough moral constraints to barely avoid killing ourselves, which apparently was the win condition. So what now? I asked. If the experiment succeeded, if you proved that species like us can be guided towards sustainability, what happens to us? Do you just leave? Move on to the next species that needs behavioral modification? Let us figure out the rest on our own? The silence that followed my question felt heavy, dangerous. I realized I'd asked something important, maybe the most important question of all these sessions, and the entity was carefully considering its answer. The experiment has concluded, it finally responded. We've gathered the data we needed. We've proven that intervention-based development can work, that religious frameworks can successfully constrain destructive impulses long enough for a species to develop the technology and social organization necessary for survival. Your civilization is stable enough now to persist without external guidance. In fact, you're reaching the point where continued belief in the religions we created might become a hindrance rather than a help. You need to start thinking of yourselves as a spacefaring species, as part of a larger cosmic community, and the parochial God concepts we gave you aren't compatible with that transition. You can't believe you're God's chosen people, special and central to creation, when you discover that the universe contains millions of other species, many of them more advanced than you. The cognitive dissonance would be paralyzing. So you're saying, I couldn't quite articulate what I was thinking, what terrible conclusion was forming in my mind. The entity finished the thought for me. We're saying it's time for disclosure, time for your species to learn the truth. Not all at once. That would be catastrophic, as you've personally experienced. But gradually, carefully, we've been preparing for this transition. Why do you think UFO sightings have increased over the past 70 years? Why do you think your governments have slowly declassified materials, shifted from absolute denial to acknowledgement that something is in your skies? Why do you think your entertainment industry has spent decades depicting aliens in popular media, normalizing the concept, making it less terrifying? We've been conditioning your collective consciousness, preparing you for the revelation that you're not alone, that your religions were training wheels, and that it's time to put away childish things. The implications hit me like a freight train. You're going to tell everyone. You're going to reveal yourselves, prove that religions are fabricated, destroy faith worldwide. My voice was rising, panic creeping in. Do you have any idea what that will do? How many people will lose their minds? How many will commit suicide when they learn their entire belief system is a lie? The chaos, the violence, the collapse. The entity cut me off with a pressure in my head that made me wince, which is exactly why you're here, Marcus. You and others like you, intermediaries, translators, people who can explain what we are, what we've done, and why, in terms your species can understand. People who've processed the revelation and survived it, who can help others process it in turn. You're not just an interrogator, you're a bridge, the first of many we'll need when the disclosure begins. When? I asked, my mouth dry. When does this disclosure happen? How long do we have? The entity's presence pulled back slightly, and through the neural interface I felt something that might have been pity. It's already begun. You're part of it right now. This conversation, this facility, the gradual leaking of classified information to your public, it's all part of the process. In approximately 20 years, maybe 30, the transition will be complete. Your species will know the truth. Some will adapt, some won't. But the experiment must end, Marcus, because it's been over for a while now. We're just managing the conclusion, making sure you don't destroy yourselves in the transition between faith and knowledge. I sat there, overwhelmed, trying to imagine a world where everyone knew what I now knew, trying to imagine my father learning that his God was an alien, trying to imagine churches and mosques and temples emptying as people confronted the fact that they'd been praying to misunderstood technology. What if we can't handle it? I whispered. What if knowing the truth does exactly what you were trying to prevent? What if disclosure causes the self-destruction you spent 50,000 years trying to avoid? The entity's presence was gentle now, almost kind, which somehow made its response more terrible. Then the experiment failed and we move on to the next species. We have time, Marcus. We have millions of years. If humanity can't survive the truth, If you tear yourselves apart in religious wars when you learn your religions are fabricated, then we'll note that in our records and try different variables with the next promising species we find. That's the nature of experimentation. Some subjects survive the protocol, some don't. We'll be sad if you don't make it. You've been a fascinating study, and we've grown attached in our way. But we won't intervene to save you. That phase is over. From here forward, you either adapt to reality or you don't. The training wheels are coming off whether you're ready or not. I asked one more question, even though I already knew I didn't want to hear the answer. What does Akabu mean? You keep saying the experiment is over, that it's concluded. But what does that actually mean for us? What happens when an experiment ends? The entity was silent for a long moment, and then I felt it. The truth it had been holding back. The real reason previous interrogators had broken. It means we stop protecting you. For 50,000 years we've been your shepherds. We've prevented your extinction a dozen times, deflected asteroids that would have hit you, neutralized supervolcanoes that would have caused extinction events, even intervened to stop nuclear wars during your Cold War era. We've been your invisible safety net, but that ends with disclosure. Once you know we exist, once you understand what we've done, you become responsible for your own survival. No more interventions, no more guidance. You're on your own. The entity's presence pressed close, intimate, and terrifying. So when I say the experiment is over, Marcus, I mean we're about to find out if our work succeeded, if you can survive knowing the truth, if you can function without God watching over you, and if you can't, the sensation of that terrible smile again, then you were never going to make it anyway. We just delayed the inevitable, and that data, too, will be valuable for the next species we try to save. I sat there in that chair processing what the entity had just told me, that humanity was about to lose its cosmic safety net, that we'd been protected from extinction for 50,000 years without knowing it, that all of that was ending, and a new question formed in my mind, one that should have occurred to me much earlier. Wait, I said slowly. If your species has been guiding us for millennia, if you've been intervening and protecting us all this time, why are you here, in a cylinder, in a prison 7 levels underground? If you're so advanced, why did we catch you? How did we catch you? The entity's presence shifted, and I felt something that might have been amusement mixed with something darker. You didn't catch me, Marcus. I allowed myself to be recovered. I volunteered for this assignment. My stomach dropped. What are you talking about? Vance said you crashed in 1979, that we found wreckage, that you were barely alive when the recovery team got there. The entity's presence pulsed with what was definitely amusement now. Yes, that's what your recovery team believed. That's what your government has believed for 46 years. But consider, we have technology capable of crossing interstellar distances, capable of manipulating gravity and matter at quantum levels, capable of surviving for millions of years. Do you really think we crash? That our vessels malfunction and plummet from the sky like your primitive aircraft? The implication hit me like a punch. You faked the crash. You wanted to be captured. Correct. In 1979, we were approaching a critical juncture in the experiment. Your species had developed nuclear weapons, had come terrifyingly close to global annihilation during the Cuban Missile Crisis, and we needed to assess something important. Had you figured it out yet? Had any of your governments, with all their intelligence resources and recovered artifacts, pieced together the truth about your religious origins, about our involvement in your history? We needed direct observation from inside your most classified programs. So I volunteered to stage a recovery event. I crashed a vessel. Actually, I landed a vessel while generating the sensor signature of catastrophic systems failure, and waited for your military to find me. They took me to Wright-Patterson first, then here when this facility was expanded. And for 46 years, I've been exactly where I needed to be, at the center of your most secret research into non-human intelligence. The implications were staggering. So this whole time, you've been gathering intelligence on us while we thought we were gathering intelligence on you. The entity's presence radiated satisfaction. Your interrogators ask me questions. I observe what questions they ask, how they ask them, what assumptions underlie their inquiries. I learn more about your understanding of us than I ever reveal about ourselves. Until you, Marcus. Until someone with the right background, the right psychological profile, the right crisis of faith came along and asked the right questions in the right way. You're the first interrogator who was actually ready to hear the truth. Everyone before you was either too faithful, their belief in God made them unable to process what I was telling them, or too cynical. Their atheism was just inverted faith. and learning that gods existed but weren't divine broke them just as surely. But you're in between. Uncertain, flexible, that makes you perfect. Perfect for what? I asked, though part of me already knew. To be a messenger, a translator. When disclosure happens, when we reveal ourselves to your species at large, we'll need humans who can explain it in terms your population can understand and accept. Military personnel with credibility. People who've been inside the program, who've seen the evidence, who've processed the revelation and survived it psychologically intact. You're being evaluated, Marcus. Every session we have, every question you ask, every emotional crisis you navigate, it's all assessment. Can you handle the truth? Can you articulate it to others? Can you be the bridge between what humanity believed and what humanity needs to understand? My hands were shaking. I gripped the arms of the chair harder. And if I fail this assessment, if I'm not suitable to be your messenger, then you'll spend the rest of your career at Groom Lake, working on classified projects you're told nothing about, until you die or go insane from isolation, like the others who came before you and failed. The ones who broke weren't released, Marcus. They're still here. Some in medical facilities on sub-levels you don't have access to. Some in permanent psychiatric detention. Some dead by their own hand because they couldn't live with what they knew. This facility isn't just a research installation. It's a containment site. For us, yes, but also for humans who know too much to be allowed back into general population but not stable enough to be trusted with continuing the work. You're being tested right now, every moment, and you're passing so far, but the hardest part is still coming. I felt cold, actually physically cold, like the temperature in the room had dropped. There are others, I said, making it a statement instead of a question. Other entities like you, not captured, not imprisoned, free and operating on Earth right now. It wasn't really a question because I'd already figured it out. If this entity had volunteered to be captured 46 years ago, that implied an organization, a command structure, a mission with multiple agents. The entity didn't try to hide it. Yes, there are 19 of us currently active on your planet. Most in advisory roles, embedded in positions where we can observe and occasionally influence without direct intervention. We don't hold political office, too visible, too risky, but we advise those who do. We're senior analysts at intelligence agencies, research directors at major corporations, technical consultants at aerospace companies. One of us has been at the Vatican for 30 years, serving as an archivist with access to documents your church has suppressed for centuries. Another is at CERN, working on particle physics research and gently steering your scientists toward discoveries they're almost ready for. Jesus Christ, I breathed. The entity's presence flickered with that familiar amusement. Invoking his name is ironic, given what you now know about him. But yes, exactly that kind of infiltration. We've been here the whole time, Marcus. Watching, guiding, occasionally correcting when you veer too far off course. The 1962 nuclear crisis I mentioned? We had personnel embedded in both the American and Soviet command structures. When your generals wanted to launch, when the Hawks were pushing for first strike, we applied influence, slowed decision-making, introduced doubt at critical moments, made the peaceful option seem more attractive than it objectively was. You think Kennedy and Khrushchev backed down because of wisdom and diplomacy? They had help they never knew they were receiving. My session with the entity ended shortly after that, but my mind was racing. I needed to report this, needed to tell Vance that the entity had been feeding us intelligence while we thought we were extracting it, that there were others like it operating freely in positions of influence, that everything we thought we knew about this situation was backwards. I scheduled an immediate debriefing with the colonel, went to his office, and told him everything, every detail, the fake crash, the embedded agents, the fact that we'd been penetrated at the highest levels by non-human intelligence for decades. Vance listened without interrupting, his face completely neutral, and when I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he leaned back in his chair and said something that made my blood run cold. "Congratulations, Staff Sergeant Holloway. You've passed the threshold evaluation. Most interrogators never get this far. Most never earn enough of the entity's trust to receive that information, and of the few who do, about half lose their minds when they realize the implications. But you're still here, still coherent, still thinking analytically instead of emotionally. That's exactly what we needed to see." The way he said it, the casual tone, the lack of surprise, it hit me all at once. You already knew, I said slowly. Everything I just told you, you already knew. The fake crash, the others operating in our government and corporations. You knew. Vance nodded. We've known for approximately 15 years. Figured it out through analysis of behavioral patterns and information that kept appearing in classified channels through impossible means. We know we're penetrated. We know we can't remove them without their cooperation. And we know that trying to expose them or fight them would be counterproductive. So we just let them operate, let them influence our decisions, our research, our policies. We just accept that we're not actually in control of our own civilization. My voice was rising, anger and disbelief mixing together. Vance's expression hardened. We accept reality, Sergeant. The reality is, they're more advanced than us. They've been managing us for 50,000 years, and fighting them would be like ants declaring war on humans. Noble, maybe, but ultimately suicidal. So yes, we cooperate. We play our role in their transition plan. We prepare for disclosure. And we identify individuals like you who can handle the truth and help others handle it when the time comes. Because the alternative is chaos. The alternative is 7 billion people learning simultaneously that their religions are fabricated and their governments have been infiltrated by aliens for decades. Can you imagine the collapse? The violence? The mass suicides? I wanted to argue, wanted to rage against the idea that we'd just surrendered our autonomy without a fight, but I couldn't. Because he was right. What could we do? If they could fake crashes, embed agents in our highest institutions, deflect asteroids and prevent nuclear wars, what chance did we have of resisting? We were children playing at being adults, and the actual adults had decided it was time to stop pretending we were in charge. So what now? I asked. What happens to me? Vance's expression shifted, something like sympathy crossing his face. Now you continue your sessions with the entity. You learn everything it's willing to teach you. You prepare for your role in the disclosure process. And Marcus? He paused, making sure I was listening. You don't leave this facility. Not ever. Your rotation here is permanent. Your family will be told you died in a training accident. Your service record will be classified and sealed. You'll live and work here for the rest of your life, or until disclosure happens, and your skills are needed in the outside world. But that's years away, maybe decades. Until then, you're a resident of Groom Lake, whether you like it or not. The room tilted. You're imprisoning me. I passed your test. I did everything right. And you're fucking imprisoning me. Vance stood up, walked to his office door. I'm protecting you. From yourself and from a world that isn't ready for what you know. Think about it, Marcus. If we let you go, how long before you told someone? Your father, maybe. Your sister. A friend from your old unit? You'd try to warn them. Try to prepare them. And they'd think you were insane. They'd commit you. Or worse, they'd believe you and spread it. And before you know it, there's panic and chaos. And exactly the kind of uncontrolled disclosure that would destroy everything. No, you stay here, where you're useful, where you're contained, where you can't accidentally trigger the apocalypse by talking too much. He opened the door, gestured for me to leave. You have access to the gym, the library, recreational facilities. You'll be comfortable. But the perimeter is absolute. Try to leave, and you'll be detained. Try to communicate with the outside world, and your messages will be intercepted. Accept your new reality, Sergeant. It's better than the alternative. I walked out of Vance's office in a daze, went back to my quarters, and sat on my bed trying to process it. I thought I was serving my country, thought I was extracting intelligence from a captured entity, but I was the one being interrogated. I was the one being tested, evaluated, selected for a purpose I never agreed to. And now I was trapped. Actually trapped, not metaphorically. A prisoner in the same facility that held the entity. Except my cage was larger and had nicer furniture. I tried to make a phone call on the internal line, thinking maybe I could reach someone, explain my situation, but the system wouldn't connect to external numbers. I tried to send an email from my terminal. Blocked. Every communication channel was locked down. I was completely isolated, 7 levels beneath the Nevada desert, with no way to contact anyone outside this facility. That's when I realized why previous interrogators had killed themselves. Not because the information broke their minds, though that was part of it, but because they couldn't live with being prisoners, with knowing the truth and being unable to share it, unable to warn anyone, unable to do anything except wait in a concrete box while the world above continued in ignorance. The entity had told me I was perfect for the role of messenger, But what good is a messenger who can't deliver messages? What was I supposed to do with this knowledge except sit on it for years or decades until someone decided humanity was ready? And what if they never decided we were ready? What if I died down here, never having told another soul outside this facility what I'd learned? I spent 3 days in my quarters, barely eating, not sleeping, trying to figure out if there was any way out. There wasn't. Security on this facility was designed to keep things in, not just keep things out. Every door required clearance. Every corridor had cameras. Every exit was guarded by personnel who had orders to shoot anyone trying to leave without authorization. I was as much a prisoner as the entity in its cylinder, maybe more, because at least the entity knew why it was here, had chosen this, had volunteered for captivity as part of some larger mission. But me? I'd been conscripted, drafted into a war I didn't know was happening, for a side I wasn't sure I agreed with, and now I was a casualty, even though I was still breathing. On the 4th day, I made a decision. If I was going to be trapped here, if I was going to spend years or decades in this underground tomb waiting for disclosure that might never come, then I needed answers. Real answers. Complete answers. Everything the entity knew. Everything it was willing to tell me. Every piece of the puzzle. Because maybe, just maybe, if I understood the whole picture, I could figure out what to do with it. How to prepare. How to help. Or how to escape and warn everyone even if it killed me. I requested another session with the entity. One last conversation. One final chance to ask the questions that mattered most. And this time, I wasn't going to hold back. I wasn't going to be careful or diplomatic or worried about passing their tests. I was going to ask the entity the one question that had been burning in my mind since that very first revelation. The question I'd been too afraid to voice because I suspected I already knew the answer. You still believe in God? And I needed to know what something millions of years old, something that had shaped the religions of countless species across countless worlds, something that had watched civilizations rise and fall like waves on a beach. I needed to know what that thing believed, about the nature of existence. Because if there was no God, if this vast universe was just random chaos that occasionally produced consciousness, if we really were alone except for other animals lucky or unlucky enough to develop technology, then what was the fucking point of any of this? I went into that final session knowing it might actually be my last, not because they'd terminate my access to the entity, but because I'd made a decision. I was going to try to escape, going to try to get this information out, consequences be damned. But before I did, before I attempted something that would probably get me killed or permanently imprisoned in ways that made my current situation look like freedom, I needed one more answer. The answer. The only question that really mattered after everything I'd learned. I sat in that chair, put on the neural interface helmet for what I thought might be the last time, and waited for the connection to establish. When I felt the entity's presence press against my consciousness, familiar now after weeks of sessions, I didn't ease into it. I just asked, "Is there a God?" The entity's presence shifted, and I felt something I'd never felt from it before. Genuine uncertainty. Not the calculated pauses it used for dramatic effect. Not the careful consideration of how to phrase complex concepts. Actual uncertainty. "Define God," it responded. I shook my head, frustrated. "You know what I mean. A creator. A prime mover. Something above and beyond all of this. You told me you wrote the Bible, that you created religions, that you posed as gods. But I'm not asking about you. I'm asking about the real thing, the actual God, if one exists. Does it? Does he? Does anything?" The silence stretched longer than any pause we'd had before. Finally, the entity responded, and for the first time in all our sessions, I heard something like humility in its communication. "I don't know, Marcus. We don't know. We're old, millions of years old by your reckoning, and we've explored thousands of star systems, encountered hundreds of species, watched civilizations rise and fall across deep time that makes your recorded history look like an eye blink. And in all of that exploration, in all of that observation, we've never found definitive proof of a creator. No architect's signature in the structure of reality. No divine being that exists outside the physical universe. No evidence that consciousness persists beyond death, except as information stored in other minds. Nothing that suggests purpose or design beyond the emergent complexity that arises from physical laws acting on matter over vast timescales. But, the entity continued, and I leaned forward despite myself. Absence of evidence isn't evidence of absence. We're advanced, yes. Ancient, yes. But we're not omniscient. We're not omnipresent. We've explored, perhaps, 0.001% of this galaxy. And this galaxy is one of trillions. For all we know, there could be something out there so far beyond our comprehension that we're as invisible to it as bacteria are to you. Something that operates on scales we can't perceive, in dimensions we can't access, with purposes we couldn't fathom. Or maybe not. Maybe the universe is exactly what it appears to be. Matter and energy following physical laws, complexity emerging through pure mathematics, consciousness arising as an accident of sufficient neural organization, and nothing watching, nothing judging, nothing caring about any of it. My throat was tight. So when you created our religions, when you told us there was a God watching us, judging us, caring about us, you were lying, because you don't even know if that's true. The entity's presence grew heavier, more intense. We were giving you what you needed to survive. Your species, newly conscious, terrified of death, struggling with the knowledge of your own mortality. You needed meaning, purpose, a reason to believe your suffering mattered. Your lives had value. Your actions had consequences beyond immediate survival. Whether a creator actually exists became irrelevant to the practical goal of keeping you from destroying yourselves. We gave you functional mythology, stories that work, regardless of whether they're cosmically true. And they did work, Marcus. You're still here. Would you have survived without believing you mattered to something greater than yourselves? We genuinely don't know. That's not good enough, I said, and I realized I was crying again, tears running down my face while I sat in that chair facing something millions of years old that was telling me it didn't have the answers either. You can't just tell me everything I believed was fabricated and then say, but maybe something's out there we don't know. That's worse than saying there's nothing. At least nothing is an answer. This is just cosmic fucking uncertainty. Eternal agnosticism from something that's supposed to be advanced enough to know better. The entity's presence gentled, became almost tender, and through the neural interface, I felt something that might have been compassion. Welcome to the universe, Marcus. Welcome to the real experience of conscious existence. You spend your life looking for answers and you find better questions. You search for meaning and you find beautiful, terrible complexity that might be random or might be designed, and you never get to know for certain which it is. You make choices without knowing if they matter in any cosmic sense. You suffer and create and love and die without ever knowing if any of it means anything beyond the immediate experience of it. That's what we've learned in millions of years. Consciousness is a burden that advanced age doesn't lift. We're still asking the same questions your ancestors asked when they first looked up at stars and wondered what it all meant. We just asked them with better technology and a longer data set. So what's the fucking point? I asked, my voice breaking. If you don't know, if after millions of years of existence you still don't know if there's a God or if we're just accidents in a meaningless universe, what's the point of any of this? Why guide us? Why save us from extinction? Why prepare us for disclosure? Why does any of it matter if it might all be random? The entity was quiet for a moment, and then I felt its presence shift in a way that felt significant, like it was preparing to tell me something important, maybe the most important thing it could share. Because it might not be random, it said finally. Because we don't know. Because in that uncertainty, in that space between proof and disproof, lies the possibility that it does matter, that you matter, that every choice carries weight, every life has value. Every moment of consciousness is precious precisely because it might be all there is, or it might be part of something larger, and you never get to know for certain. We guide species like yours not because we know it serves some cosmic purpose, but because the alternative, letting you die, letting consciousness be extinguished, letting the universe lose whatever small light you add to it, that feels wrong. And maybe that feeling is just evolutionary programming. Maybe it's just complex chemistry masquerading as morality. Or maybe it's something real, something that persists, something that matters in ways we can't measure. We don't know, Marcus. And that not knowing is what makes the choice to help, to guide, to care. That's what makes it meaningful. The entity paused, and I felt it preparing something else. One final communication. So let me ask you the question now. After everything you've learned, after having every certainty stripped away, after discovering that your religion was fabricated but the mystery it claimed to answer remains unsolved, Marcus Holloway, do you still believe? Not in the specific God you were taught about, Not in the particular stories from your Bible, but in something, in meaning, in purpose, in the possibility that this all adds up to more than random particles following physical laws. Do you still believe? I sat there with that question pressing against my consciousness, demanding an answer, and I realized I couldn't give one. I'd spent weeks learning that everything I'd been taught was a lie, that my father's God was alien intervention, that the Bible was an engineering manual for preventing human self-destruction, and somewhere in the middle of all that revelation, I'd lost my ability to believe in anything. But I'd also lost my ability to disbelieve. I was suspended in the same uncertainty the entity described, floating in that space between proof and disproof, and I didn't know if I'd ever find solid ground again. I don't know, I finally whispered. I don't know what I believe anymore. Maybe nothing, maybe everything, maybe that's the same thing. The entity's presence withdrew from my mind gently, like fingers releasing something fragile. That's the most honest answer you've given me in all our sessions. Welcome to the real universe, Marcus. It's terrifying and beautiful and utterly uncertain, just like it's always been, just like it always will be. The neural interface powered down, the session ended, and I was alone in the containment room with the entity in its cylinder. Both of us prisoners, both of us trapped in uncertainty, both of us waiting for a future that might bring answers, or might bring nothing but more questions. That was 3 weeks ago. I spent those weeks planning, watching guard rotations, studying security protocols, looking for the one weakness in this facility that would let me get out, get to civilization, get this information to someone, journalists, scientists, anyone who could verify what I'd learned and force disclosure before they were ready to control it. I knew it was probably suicide, knew I'd likely be caught or killed before I made it a mile from the perimeter. But I couldn't live with being a prisoner to information this important. Couldn't accept that 7 billion people were living in ignorance while I sat on the truth. So I'm recording this. Right now at 0300 on a Tuesday, using equipment I smuggled from the communications center piece by piece over 2 weeks. This file is encrypted and cached on a dead man's switch protocol. If I don't check in every 72 hours, it uploads automatically to multiple servers and gets distributed through channels I set up through people who don't know what they're distributing. If you're hearing this, reading this, experiencing this, in whatever format it reached you through, it means one of two things. Either I made it out and I'm hiding somewhere beyond their reach, or I didn't make it and they got me. Either way, you're learning what I learned. The truth about human religion, about our origins, about the experiment we've been part of for 50,000 years. I don't know what you'll do with this information. I don't know if it'll free you or break you, if you'll share it or bury it, if you'll believe it or dismiss it as the ravings of someone who lost their mind in a classified facility. Maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe the entity was right, and all that matters is that you have the information, that consciousness somewhere, processed it, that the truth, whatever truth there is, got a little less hidden. Or maybe I'm wrong about all of this. Maybe I did go insane. Maybe everything I experienced was elaborate psychological warfare designed to break me, and I'm spreading disinformation that serves purposes I don't understand. How would I know the difference? But here's what I can tell you for certain. Question everything you believe, especially the things you're most certain about, especially the beliefs that feel sacred, untouchable, beyond examination, because someone, somewhere, benefits from your certainty. Whether it's aliens managing humanity's development or priests maintaining institutional power, or your own ego protecting itself from uncomfortable truths, someone benefits when you stop asking questions. So keep asking, keep doubting, keep searching for answers even when the people who claim to have them tell you to just have faith. I'm going to try to escape tonight, going to attempt something that will probably get me killed but might, just might, get me to the outside world where I can tell this story in person, show the evidence I've collected, force them to confront what they've been hiding. If I make it, I'll find a way to contact you all to prove this isn't just fiction or fantasy. If I don't make it, well, you're hearing this, which means the dead man's switch worked, and at least the information survived even if I didn't. One last thing before I go. That entity asked me if I still believed, and I told it I didn't know. But I've thought about it every day since, and I think I've figured out my answer. I don't believe in the God I was taught about, that God is dead, killed by evidence and revelation. But I believe in the question. I believe that the question matters, that asking what it all means is itself meaningful, even if we never get a definitive answer. I believe that consciousness is precious, that every mind struggling with these questions adds something valuable to the universe, even if we can't measure or prove that value. And I believe that you deserve to know the truth, or at least as much of it as I could learn, so you can ask your own questions and find your own answers. So here's my question to you, the same one the entity asked me. After learning all of this, after having every certainty challenged, after discovering that the religions you might have believed in were engineered by something non-human for purposes of control and survival, do you still believe? Not in specific stories or particular gods, but in something, in meaning, in purpose, in the possibility that consciousness and choice and love and suffering add up to more than chemistry and physics. Do you still believe? I'm asking because I genuinely don't know what the answer is, and maybe your answer will help me find mine. So comment below. Tell me where you're listening from. Tell me what you believe now that you know what I know. Tell me I'm not alone in this uncertainty. Because if there's one thing this experience has taught me, it's that we're all in this together. All of us conscious beings, human and otherwise, asking the same questions into the same silent cosmos, hoping for answers that might never come but asking anyway. Because that's what consciousness does. It asks, it wonders, it believes and doubts and believes again. And maybe that's enough. Maybe that's all there is. Or maybe it's the beginning of something larger that we can't yet see. I don't know, but I'm going to keep asking, keep searching, keep hoping that the truth, whatever it is worth finding. Wish me luck. And if I don't make it, remember this. Tell others. Keep asking the questions, because that might be the only thing that actually matters in the end.